Blog for the Blood God.
G'day guys, I just wanted to take a second to talk to you about the exciting Blog for the Blood God fundraiser raffle, where you can buy tickets for your chance to win a set of neoprene objective markers and a pack of 50 Blog for the Blood God dice. If you'd like to buy some tickets, click on the link in the description of this video. You can scroll down and view the prizes there, and if you'd like to buy some tickets, select buy tickets, select how many tickets you would like to buy, select that you are over 18 and that you agree with the terms, and then I would recommend deselecting the subscription because who needs unnecessary emails, and then you can proceed to fill out your details. If you are an Australian resident, you will be required to select your state. If not, just select any state. It doesn't particularly matter as long as the street address and details of postage are correct as per above. And then you can go through, proceed on payment, and then it will submit your ticket sales. The reason we've decided to do a raffle in order to raise funds is because this year I have been named as captain for Team Australia for the WTC World Team Championships of Warhammer 40k. This is a once-in-a-lifetime, really exciting opportunity for me. However, as an Australian, that trip is extremely expensive, and unfortunately, life does what it does and has thrown a bunch of unforeseen expenses my way in the terms of veterinary bills for my very sick cat. So any help that we can get to send me to Europe to represent Australia would be greatly appreciated. And also, if there's any money left over at the end, it will go towards improving the quality and frequency of the content here on YouTube. So I very much appreciate any support that you are prepared to give, and I look forward to rewarding that with some exciting prizes. If this does well, we'll do multiple of these raffles because I've got plenty of stuff to give away, and I really do want to show some support for the community that supports me so well. So thank you very much for your consideration. If you'd like to buy a ticket, links are in the description below, and let's get into today's video. G'day guys, welcome to this live stream. Very excited, we've got new points costs to talk about, and I've got a few channel updates for you guys, so it's going to be a ripper of a little video here. I've got myself some Jack Daniels, I've got myself some World Eaters Terminators to paint, and it's going to be a real ripper of a video, so strap in, grab yourself a drink, grab yourself something to paint, and let's have a fucking chat, shall we? First things first, just some basic admin stuff. I'm relatively, incompetent when it comes to computers, technology, apps, that sort of shit. So let me know in the chat if anything drops out or if the audio is not great or something like that, and I'll do my best to fix it live because I'm testing a different setup with the live stream. I'm trying to share my screens and have multiple cameras and yeah. Anyway, so yeah, let me know if that's all working. I've also got my phone down here, which has got all of your comments in the chat. So I will be checking that throughout the stream and answering questions as they come up. If there's a particular question that you really want me to answer, you can do a super chat, which is just chuck a $1 donation, and that highlights the comment, and then I won't miss it. Whereas, depending on, how this goes, there may end up with a whole boatload of comments in there, and it may be hard for me to track them. So if there's a particular question that you really want answered, do one of those little $1, $10, however much you think it's worth, super chats, and that will make sure that your question gets answered. But basically, yeah, it's the topic of today. Fucking fluff on my nose already. Topic of today is the New Balance data slate. But before we jump straight into that, I want to just give you a couple of updates on the channel itself. And then basically we're going to kick back, have a drink, paint some Terminators, and talk about the new points costs and what their implications are. So, channel updates. The Terminators that I'm painting are actually for an event that I'm attending this coming weekend. It's Saturday morning, 6 a.m, so the subsequent weekend, which is the Australian and New Zealand Team Championships. This is the big 8-man teams event here in Australia, where New Zealand sends over a couple of teams, and then every state of Australia puts together a team of 8 players, and we play this big teams event. It's inspired by the WTC. It's designed to, get people interested in that format of game, and also upskill the players that will be traveling to Europe. So it's sort of Australia's mechanism for fostering the future generations of WTC players. So really, really exciting event. I'm captain for Team Victoria this year. Really exciting. We've got a pretty strong team. I think we're arguably the favourites this year. and we've got a pretty strong history of good results, so that's going to be really exciting. And I'm running a really interesting, slightly off-meta list for my World Eaters that includes Terminators. Now, I submitted this list. This is using the old points, this event, and I'm using a unit of 10 Terminators. So you can imagine my joy when the balanced data slate dropped and the Terminators went down, because I'm already playing them in a competitive list. And we'll deep dive the specifics on why Terminators are so powerful in World Eaters and why I think they're massively underestimated, right? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some specific uses for them and some specific tricks that you can do with the Terminators that you can't do with things like 8-bound. So there's definitely some really cool stuff to discuss on the Terminator front. And then there's some cool stuff, obviously, with the other points cost changes. There's been plenty of them, and they're really exciting. So, sounds good. Let me know in the chat if the audio is fine, because that's always seems to be the thing that I can't wrap my head around, is the audio. Because I can see on the little screen there that the visuals are working, and I can see down here, but yeah, audio can be a pain. So yeah, let me know if that's all working. And when talking about the balanced data slate, I will be primarily focusing on World Eaters and the Chaos Space Marines, because I know that that's what the majority of you guys play, and that's what I play. That's sort of our area of expertise that we share. So I will be primarily talking about those. However, if there's another faction that you would like discussed, let me know in the chat, and we can pull that up, and we can have a conversation about that. Being heavily involved in team events, I've got a pretty good understanding of most factions in the game and what their sort of meta lists are going to look like, and what these points cost could mean, what the impact that's going to have on my teammates, for the factions that got nerfs, what some of the conversations that I've had with them over the last couple of days about what the impacts to their lists are going to be, what changes they're likely to make, those sorts of things. So if there's another faction, you might be a Chaos Space Marine player, or you might be a regular Space Marine player, you might be a Eldar player, and you might have some questions on how that's sort of going to impact that list, or you might have an opponent that runs these lists regularly, and you're like, I'm glad he got points nerfed, but what is his future list going to look like? So if that's something that you want to know, let me know in the chat, and I'll jump straight on it. I do see that we've got a question here from Yes My Lord. It's a $2 super chat, so thank you for the donation. I will answer that one real quickly before we jump over into this, and the question is quite simple. It's combi bolters or combi weapons for Terminators. Now, interesting question. I ummed and ahed about this for ages. Depends on whether you're talking about Chaos Space Marines or whether you're talking about World Eaters. Now, for Chaos Space Marines, because they have access to lethal and sustained hits, I recommend the bolters, because those bolters have essentially twice as many shots. And when you're putting lethal hits on them, and you get reroll hits if you have, because they're Terminators, right? You're actually going to be able to put out a ton of damage to even just light vehicles, right? Because every 6 to hit is going to automatically wound, and you can reroll all of their wounds, and they get 40 shots roughly. So I recommend for CSM, combi bolters, and then for World Eaters, you could take either. I went with the combi weapons, and that's primarily because I'm teching to try to make this unit effective into particular things, and those things are elite infantry. And against elite infantry, obviously the combi weapons, they get half as many shots, but half of the shots that they do get are going to be devastating wounds, which means no saves, no invulnerable saves, just take a wound, right? Which means this unit actually puts out a very reasonable amount of shooting into elite infantry. So if you wanted to shore up the Custodes matchup, for example, and you want to be able to drop Terminators in and just go, boom, here's a billion, or not a billion, but here's a handful of devastating wounds, you can put your opponent in a tricky spot where they're like, this is a Custodes unit, do I want to pop my Feel No Pain in the shooting phase against World Eaters? Probably not, which means when you drop down, you get roughly 20 combi weapon shots. That's going to do work, essentially. So that's why I've gone with the combi weapons instead of the combi bolters. And then as for the heavy weapon, you can probably see it here. I've got the autocannons. I think they're just way better than the flamers. It's just gives you that range, gives you the strong damage. They're really good. And then as many power fists and chain fists as you can fit in the unit. So I like to put the 2 chain fists on the 2 autocannon guys, because that way you've got a lot of your valuable weapons nested on those 2 units, and then you just make sure they're the last ones you remove as casualties. Then I like to have essentially 6 guys with power fist combi weapon, and then in World Eaters I like 2 guys with the double accursed. In Chaos Space Marines I prefer just more another accursed weapon and combi bolter guy, because their weight of fire on those combi bolters is actually more valuable than the additional attack and the reroll wounds that you would have got from the accursed weapon. So, great question. I hope that answer ticks all your boxes. But that's how I load out my Terminators. So I'm just going to grab another drink here. It's 6 a.m. and I'm drinking double jacks. Because it's in Australia. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the World Eaters points costs. So while we do that, I'm just going to prepare myself some paint, and I'm going to start doing basing on these Terminators, because the event, as I said, is next weekend. So I've got 7 days, give or take. And not only do I have to paint these 10 Terminators, but I also have to paint essentially an entire Thousand Suns army. Oh god, this paintbrush is rubbish. Why? So when I built these guys, I applied sand to their bases, as I do. And the way that I do the sand on my bases is a bit non-conventional. That's fucked. Yeah, that brush is fucked. That's game over. Maybe I'll just let him soak for a bit. I'll use this one for now. What I do is I get the super glue tube, just like a... Oh, I don't know any. I just get the tube of super glue, and I just cover the base in super glue, and I use the side of the nozzle to spread the super glue around the base, like that. And then I dip the whole thing in sand while the super glue is still wet, and then it dries almost instantly, and that lets you, then the sand cures, and whilst it's still wet, you can just throw a couple bigger stones on there, things like that, and it all dries, goes rock solid. A lot of people use things like PVA to do this, but PVA takes too long to dry, and I'm a very, very impatient hobbyist. So I like to use the, let's see if this fixed it. I like to use the super glue. The problem with the super glue though, and the problem with this method, is when you put the model in the bucket of sand and you shake it around like that, you get a little bit of sand like on the legs and stuff. So I then use one of my bigger basing brushes to just dust off the mini. But what I did last night when I did these guys, so I dusted them off prematurely. Some of the super glue was still wet, and the super glue got into the bristles of the brush, and I fucked it. But that's what you get for being impatient. Most people would learn from that mistake. I don't. I just make the same mistake over and over and over. So I think that fixed it though. Yeah, that fixed it. Sick. But yeah, so what was I talking about before I got stuck on this rant about this shitty brush? I don't remember. So let's just jump straight into the balanced data slate. So World Eaters, I guess I should start with some sort of overall thoughts on the data slate. I know this has been said elsewhere, but I think it is so true that it merits repeating, is that this feels like the second component of the previous data slate. The previous data slate was told to us all that it was going to be the internal balanced data slate, which is a great idea, and that's something that we were all excited for. However, World Eaters just got nerfs in the previous one. We didn't get any buffs, and now this feels like it's the buffs that together combine to make for an internal balance, field manual or whatever you want to call it. So that's what I feel like this is, and I think with them both considered together, it's a very reasonable document. I think it's a very reasonable points cost change. And I think the reason that they did them separately, and I actually support this, a lot of people like a little bit pissy because we've spent the last couple of months, 3 months with with suboptimal points cost because they just hit us with the nerfs, then gave us the buff 3 months later. But I actually think they needed to do that because the thing that I've always been concerned about is that they're going to make too many changes at once because they're pressured to solve every problem in the world. If they make too many changes at once, they're going to end up creating more problems than they solve. So the world leaders were performing quite well previously. And if they went and flipped it all on its head and went, cool, these are going down, these are going up, this is going left, right, and center, they could end up making it just worse than it was previously. And this is one of the beauties of having regular updates, where they're updating every 3 months, is they can do some slight nerfs, bring our win rate down, then some slight buffs, bring it back up, and just sort of fine-tune the points instead of trying to get a bullseye with every dart. They're going, okay, cool, let's just throw one and see where it lands, and then let's readjust and then throw another and see where that lands, and then readjust and then throw another. And that method is going to be much, much better at achieving the desired result, which is a well-balanced, well-rounded, internally balanced and externally balanced rule set. So, yeah, I 100% support GW on this one, which is rare for me, but yeah, I think they've done a great job. As for my thoughts on the overall outcomes of the data slate, I think it's fantastic. I think that there's still tons of missed opportunities in here where it's like, oh, why did they leave the Helldrake? Why the hell did they not fix that completely unplayably bad unit? And I also question their methods. Do they have the data? Because I'm sure they've got the app, right? Now, one of the things when they released this app that I was really excited about was that they were going to have data on every list that you write. Every time you write a list in that app, they're going to have the data, and they're going to be able to see what units people are taking. And I have no doubt in my mind that when they did that, they would have seen that nobody, not a single person in the last 18 months of 10th edition, nobody has ran a frickin' Helldrake. They are unplayably bad. 210 points. They are way too expensive for a model that's OC 0 and has nothing particularly exciting about it defensively and nothing particularly exciting about it offensively. It's like, in what world is that unit reasonably costed? It should be 110 points tops. It should be practically free. If I could choose between a Helldrake right now and a unit of, 8-bound, regular 8-bound, I'd choose the 8-bound every day. So the Helldrake would have to be cheaper than the 8-bound for it to be worthy. Because a Mauler Fiend is way better. It's almost as fast as the Helldrake when you factor in things like advance and charge and stuff. I know the Helldrake has fly, but with that aside, the Helldrake is too fast. Its speed is excessive, right? Whereas the Mauler Fiend's fine. And then the Mauler Fiend, if it touches something in combat, it's actually going to fuck it up, whereas the Helldrake's probably not. The Helldrake are probably going to kill, a couple of Marines or whatever. And then on top of that, the Mauler Fiend is just as tough and has fucking an OC value. And any model with an OC of 0, I'm immediately super, super hesitant to take it, because especially for world leaders, you want to be able to jump on an objective and control it so that when your opponent kills you, you can sticky the objective. That's one of our go-to strategies. And the Helldrake can't even do that. So it's just bad. It needs either a massive overhaul in its data sheet to be an actual relevant playing piece, or it needs to just get a massive points reduction. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the missed opportunity that is the Helldrake, and there's plenty of them in there, but we'll go through them all, sort of one by one. So let's just break down what I think will probably be valuable is view this like a and I'll do the same for Chaos Space Marine. So if you're a Chaos Space Marine player and you've been following the channel for a while, because that's where I used to sort of do a lot of my work, don't fret. We'll go through the CSM as well. But what we'll do is we'll just go through each unit in the index, and we'll talk about my updated thoughts on that with this balanced starter slate factored in. So we've got Angron there, 415 points. So he remained the same. I think he's still an auto include. He's such a important model in the meta, because if your opponent has the ability to neg1 hit you, whether it be something that's got whatever ability it has that can make you neg1 to hit, that can absolutely destroy world leaders, because when your berserkers go from hitting on 3s to hitting on 4s, if you can't reroll your hits, you're just doing no damage. Even Exalted 8-bound, if they go in with their chain fists and they're like, "Row," and then you're like, oh, hitting on 3s goes to hitting on 4s, it's like, oh, I only have 4 attacks per 8-bound. So when they're hitting on 4s, they do nothing. Now you've got 2 hits with 2 damage weapons. So I think Angron is critical for those matchups. He's also critical because outside of the Helldrake, he's the only unit really that has a fly characteristic, and you got the Demon Prince as well, of course. But that fly characteristic is super important for world leaders, because it means that your opponent can't just screen you out. If you don't have fly, they can just go, cool, here's a big line of guardsmen, and then in your turn, all you can kill is guardsmen. So you go in, you kill all the guardsmen, and then they kill you, and it's game over. So you need to be able to fly so that you can threaten to fly over his guardsmen and hit his tanks, right? So lists without Angron are super vulnerable to those things. Now, there are other ways of dealing with that challenge, but I think Angron is the most effective in that regard. And then also, he also has some really, really high quality, high damage attacks. So he's one of those things that he's a reliable problem solver. If your opponent sends out something that's really tough, like it might be something with neg1 damage and a ton of wounds, right? If you go, cool, 8-bounder trash into that, because they're only 2 damage, so anything with neg1 damage halves their damage output, whereas neg1 damage is almost irrelevant versus Angron. So I think the fact that he has that high damage, the fact that he also has all those sweeps that hit on 2s, he's able to cleave his way through bigger squads as well. So I think for those reasons, Angron fills a really important niche. And he's something that you need. Even those reroll hits is a really good way of taking something like a unit of 10 berserkers and pushing their damage output up to a point where they actually just delete a unit of Necron Wraiths. They actually just delete a Catan. If you get a full unit of 10 Terminators, they charge a Catan, they have the reroll hits from Angron, and perhaps you put lethal hits on them that turn from your blessings, they'll pop a Catan. From full health to dead. And there's not much in the game there's not much in our faction that can achieve that task. So if you don't put in those berserkers, what do you do in the Necron matchup? I mean, if you don't put in, Angron, what do you do in the Necron matchup? You're really going to struggle. So I think Angron is still, if you're going to run a rounded list and your goal is to win tournaments or win games in tournaments, and your goal is to, it's more that your goal is to not have certain matchups within the meta that you automatically lose. Because if you don't have Angron, there are certain matchups where when you get put into it, you're like, wow, I don't have the tools to deal with you, right? So that's what Angron is. He's the tool, a very important tool to deal with certain matchups. And I think you can definitely run a non-Angron list, and it's totally fine, but it will be vulnerable to certain matchups. That's all I'm saying. Next we have the 8-bound, the regular standard 8-bound. I call them 6-bound just because it's funny. But these guys didn't get any points reductions, and I know there were a few people asking for them because they went up probably a little bit too harshly. I think 140 points is probably... just kick the camera. I think 140 points is pretty reasonable for them, but I also think 145 is fine. They provide a few things that are really, really valuable. They provide a scout move that's not tethered to Lord Invocardus, which is really, really valuable. And the reroll ones to wound aura is also really, really valuable, because it just means that, with something like Angron, I view it like if they're near him, he gets an extra attack or 2 extra attacks. Because when he's got 9 attacks that are wounding on 2s, you're probably going to roll 1 or 2 1s to wound. And then if you re-roll those and get wounds, that's 2 additional wounds. And when his damage output is so high, 2 additional wounds from Angron is really, really scary. It allows him to go into 2 vehicles and reliably pop both. Whereas if you go into 2 vehicles and you don't have that, and you're winning a vehicle on 3s, you might not pop both of them. Because if you go 4 attacks into one, 5 in the other, the one that you go into 4, you get 3 hits, then you get 2 wounds, they might pass a save. Now you're only doing d6 plus 2 damage, you're doing like 5 to 6 damage, that's not enough. Whereas if you get an additional wound, and they fail that save, well now you're doing twice the damage. So, reroll 1s to wound on Angron, really, really good. It's also really good on Berserkers with their volume of attacks. So there's tons of times where the regular 8-bound are really good. And also they bring some of the only ability that we have to get 3 damage weapons. Now that champion with his 5 attacks at 3 damage, he's really, really good. Especially into things like Custodes or anything with 3 wounds, all the various Terminator builds out there, that sort of stuff. He's really good, and it's also pretty good into things that are half damage, because instead of halving your 2 down to 1, it halves your 3 down to 2. So the champion in that unit's really good. So there's lots of reasons why regular 8-bound are really good, and I think at this points cost, they're absolutely still a very valid unit choice. Now the Exalted 8-bound, 160 points, or you can take the big unit for 320. I've been playing around with the big unit, and my hot take on this, and we'll get into this when we talk about Terminators later, but my hot take on this is that Terminators are better now. And this is the controversial take, but we'll talk about when we get to the Terminator datasheet. We'll talk about why Terminators are so much better, because there's some stuff that people just aren't considering at all, and they're doing so at their own peril. They're missing a really, really awesome opportunity here. So, I think that they both have their pros and cons. The 8-bound are obviously way faster. The Exalted 8-bound are way faster than the Terminators. Which is great, because you can use Lord Invocatus as scout to get hit them with 8-bound turn 1, which is really exciting. They also have, small unit of 3. I really like that as a rapid ingress threat, because it's quite hard to screen out a small unit of 3 Exalted 8-bound. They're also really easy to hide. You can get them in little nooks. So, I personally think the World Eaters are going to pivot to more of an MSU 8-bound build, and then if they're going to take a big brick, I think people will eventually realise that Terminator's the way to go. But yeah, Exalted 8-bound, I still love them. I still think they're worth their weight in gold, and I would still look at taking 3 units of 3 in most lists, depending on what build you want to go for. They're also really good if you do not take Angron. You definitely want lots of Exalted 8-bound. And that's because they have the capacity to hit on 2s with their Eviscerators. So when they're hitting on 2s, now all of a sudden Angron's rerolls aren't as important, even if you are into something that's neg 1 to hit, because you're like, well, I was hitting on 2s, and I do still have 6 attacks per guy on the charge. So, hitting on 2s with 6 attacks, even if they push you to hitting on 3s, you're still getting a lot of hits, I actually found that I've been using their Eviscerator profile a lot more often than originally thought, because it gets extra attacks, hits on 2s, and then if you use the stratagem to get +1 to wound on them, it's often wounding on 3s or 4s, 2s or 3s, which is roughly the same as what the Chain Fists would do. So I often find myself using the Eviscerator profile. The only real consideration is whether or not you want to spend the CP, or whether you want to bank the CP for something else, and whether or not you need the AP characteristic. Often the AP2 is enough to push people to their invulnerable saves anyway, because there'll be either a 3-up save with a 5-up invulnerable save, or there'll be a 2-up save with a 4-up invulnerable save. Either way, AP2 is sufficient, and because you're in combat, they don't get cover or anything like that. So combat needs to be AP2 is fine. So yeah, I often find myself just using the Eviscerators. And that's sort of my approach on the Exalted 8-bound. Now Jackal's going down. They only went down 5 points, which in my opinion, is a bit soft. I would have gone down to 60 points because often they only fill the role of kind of just a backfield screening unit that can hold an objective. They very rarely kill anything, so the fact that they're slightly better at killing things than, say, cultists doesn't really matter. But almost everybody was taking 1 or 2 units, so I sort of view this as just every worldies player just gets this extra 10 points that they can spend wherever they want. Because you were already taking 2 of these. I don't think this points cost is enough to convince you to take more than the 2 units, and you're not going to take less than 2 units. So this points cost doesn't actually change anybody's lists, so to speak. It just gives everybody an extra 10 points. It's like a little nod to the worldies players, like, we know you guys have it rough, here's 10 points. That's how I view the Jackal change. There are a few things worth considering, and that is that Jackals actually can, and I've been experimenting with this a little bit, playing with them a little bit more aggressively, running 2 units so that you don't really care if they die because you've got 2 of them, and playing with them more aggressively and actually trying to kill things with them. I had a game the other day where they killed a unit of 5 tactical marines. Had a game the other day where it took them 2 turns to do it, but they killed a unit of 5 jump pack intercessors that dropped in my backfield. They dropped in, failed their charge into me. So I've gone, well, if I don't charge you, you're going to charge me and kill me. So I just charged in. That turn I took lethal hits on my blessings roll because I had some combats into vehicles up the board. And those jackals just went whoosh guy and just killed. I think they killed 3. Then the 2 remaining fought back and killed like 4 or 5 of my guys. And then we went into the next phase. Those 2 fought again, killed like 2 more guys. And then the skull smashers went bonk bonk and killed 2. So the jackals can kill things, and you wouldn't expect that from a cultist unit. If a cultist unit has somebody drop in their backfield, that cultist unit is just fucked. Whereas the jackals can fight back. So yeah, I'm happy with them at that point. But like I said, it's not going to change how many people run, so it's not really that significant of a change. What else we got? We've got Khorne Berserkers in here. Now, this one is really interesting. So I have been historically running a list that has 2 units of 10 Khorne Berserkers in it. That's what I've been running for the majority of the edition. And it's been doing really, really well. I haven't won any tournaments with it, but I've podiumed multiple times. And it's been really effective in the teams tournaments that I've been running it at. Because if you have 2 units of 10 Berserkers and you've got a Master of Executions in each, that is really hard for certain combat armies to deal with. They can't charge you because you just fight first and you just kill whatever just charged you. Especially weaker things like Eldar, but even tougher things, like say Space Marines, if they throw in their Sword Brethren or something of that nature, and you just go, cool, well, I'm going to fight first, and when I fight first, I'm going to kill 2 or 3 of your Sword Brethren. And if they're stupid and they charge in such a way that you can see their character, you're going to precision out their character with your Master of Executions. And now when they fight back with their handful of guys, they actually don't kill that whole unit of Berserkers. And as a result, you hold the objective. And then you go into the next turn and you fight first and you kill the rest of them. So it just means that they can't reliably just charge you off of an objective, which creates these really interesting situations where they have to shoot you off the objective. But if they shoot you, A, you get to Blood Surge, so you might Blood Surge in and tag them. And B, you can sticky the objective when you die. So it's a really interesting dynamic, that Berserker unit. It's just a shame that their damage output is, quite low. Particularly if they charge you and you don't get the charging bonus, then the damage output is not amazing. But I sort of view the Berserkers and the Master of Executions as a package deal. Yeah, you can't. I don't see a world where you really take Berserkers without them. Maybe if you're taking a unit with Khan, but you generally Berserkers with no character attached are not, in my opinion, a viable option. So the fact that they went down in points, it's not going to increase the number of Berserker units you take, in my opinion, because you're not going to want 3 units with 3 Masters of Execution and a 4th unit with Khan. Like it's way too many points spent on things that are AP1. You'll never kill a Space Marine army. You just won't kill them because they'll just Armor of Contempt every turn, and you'll be in a lot of trouble. So these points costs, again, I don't think they change the number of berserkers that you take. You either take 1 unit or 2. There's a lot of people that'll take 1 unit of 10 and 1 unit of 5. That's also very, very good. But you're not going to take... This isn't going to put berserkers into spam territory, but berserkers were already playable. So all it does is just soften the blow and allow you to spend more points on other things. So far, both of the points cost reductions that we've had, the Jackals and Berserkers, haven't changed any lists. Nobody's list is going to fundamentally change based on these points changes. All that's going to happen is you're going to have a few extra points to spend on other things. You're going to get maybe 10 points to spend from the Jackals that you had if you had 2 units, and then you might get, another 40 points to spend if you had 2 units of Berserkers. So you've got, you've got 50 points to play with, which is not quite another unit yet. So basically what we're entering here is the world where you probably take one of your medium strength units and buff it up to a heavy one. Like you might take some regular 8-bound and upgrade them to Exalted, or you might do something like that. But we haven't seen any fundamental changes to a World Eaters list yet. But there is some really interesting stuff coming up that is going to result in some pretty hectic changes, in my opinion. Khorne Lord of Skulls, 450 points, didn't change. I think they're sick for 450 points. Sorry, I'm just going to shake this paint. I really like the Lord of Skulls. You can run 3 of them if you're on non-WTC terrain. If you're on GW style terrain, or some other type of tournament terrain, depending on what you have at your local store or whatever, you can totally run multiple Lord of Skulls. But I think in most tournament style terrain setups, player placed terrain is also really good for the Lord of Skulls because you can make sure that you leave yourself pathways. But most tournaments, you're probably only going to run 1 or none. You're not going to run lots. One of the good things about the Lord of Skulls, the best thing about the Lord of Skulls, is that it makes Angron's Resurrection almost guaranteed. It's really, really likely. If you go in and you kill 2 things, whether it be, you kill 1 through shooting and 1 in combat. Now, when you make your blessings roll, you get to pick 2 dice and upgrade them. That's free Angron. So I look at the Lord of Skulls, it's 450 points, but if you imagine that, say, 150 of those points go towards Resurrections of Angron, because it's not going to happen in every game, but it's going to happen in more games than it doesn't, so you're getting roughly that extra value. Well, now you're looking at a 300 point unit that's a fucking toughness 13, 22 wound fucking monster. It's that's sick. Even if all it does is play the Guardian role and stick around towards your backfield, midfield kind of bully, that's sick for 300 points. So, yeah, I really like the Lord of Skulls. The only downside, of course, is that it's so massive that it's very difficult to maneuver. And that can, as something that wants to be spending a lot of its time in combat, that can be a problem. So, take caution when running a Lord of Skulls. It's not as good as its just raw stats are. There's other considerations to be made. But, if you like the model, which not everybody does, but if you like the model, absolutely, add one to your collection. They're sick. And them going unchanged is really good. And also, I don't think anything else in other armies that particularly preys on the Lord of Skulls got that much better. So it's still, its damage output and its durability are still very relevant factors. That's one of the other things when considering these balanced data slate changes is you've got to consider the whole package. What's the actual meta going to look like? And is the Lord of Skulls any good in that emerging meta? Or is it just going to get rolled? So I think with that question in mind, I think Lord of Skulls is fine. And I'm really excited for it. It's something that I've been playing a little bit. And for me, the decision comes down to the terrain at the tournament. If it's GW terrain, I'm bringing, probably 2 Lord of Skulls for fun. But if it's WTC or UKTC or any form of TC, denser sort of terrain, then hell no. The Lord of Skulls is too much of a liability for me. So that's where we're at with the Lord of Skulls. What else we got? We've got Khan the Betrayer. I fucking love Khan the Betrayer. He's one of my favourite units in the index. And when he was 80 points, he was an absolute auto-include. Even if you didn't take any Berserkers in your list, just taking Khan and just being like, cool, this one little guy, this one little 80-point guy is just going to come out, he's going to kill something, and then he's going to die. But he's going to fight on death if you kill him in combat, and he's going to stick you an objective somewhere if you kill him in shooting, and he costs 80 points. He was sick. And I think most of that still rings true at 100 points. I still really like him, and if I can fit him in a list, he's one of the top priorities. He's one of the things that I'm like, yep, I definitely want Khan if I can get him. You know, if I can make him fit. So, yeah, Khan's sick. His fight on death, because it's guaranteed, it's actually really wild, the things you can do with him. So one thing that I like doing with him is if I know my opponent has 2 command points, right? Often that makes combat really hard for the world leaders because you're going to fight in one location and then they're going to spend 2 CP, they're going to interrupt and fight in the other, and they're going to kill your unit before it gets to strike. And I'm sure we've all experienced that. It's real frustrating. It's really hard to get around. There's a few advanced tricks that you can do with model placement and stuff to mitigate it slightly, but it can be really hard, right? So one of the things I like about Khan is because you just know that he's going to fight on death, what you can do is you can go, cool, I'm going to throw, let's say I'm versing the World Leaders mirror match, right? Which happened recently. And I'm like, cool, you've got, Exalted 8-bound and regular 8-bound. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw my Exalted into your Exalted, and I'm going to throw Khan on his own with no Berserkers attached into your regular 8-bound. I'm going to fight first with my Exalted into yours and kill them. Now, would you like to spend 2 CP to interrupt and kill Khan? And if the opponent does, that's fine, because they kill Khan, but then Khan fights on death and kills those 3 8-bound. Whereas if they don't interrupt, Khan's going to just kill those 3 8-bound and I get to keep Khan. So it puts your opponent in a position where they have to spend the CP to interrupt, but they don't even, they still lose the unit that they were trying to save. Which anytime you can put your opponent in a tricky situation like that, absolutely premium. Same goes for if they go, oh, I've got a unit of Plague Marines on this objective over here. You just go, cool, Khan, get them. Khan charges them, they fight first, they kill Khan, and then Khan goes and kills like 6 or 7 of them. It's like, okay, Khan, you fucking maniac. Like, he's so good. And being able to do that for the low investment of 100 points is pretty wild. So, I love Khan. I think he's almost must-have. Some people prefer him in a unit of Berserkers, which I totally get, because then you're getting the reroll ones to hit and wound, and some ablative wounds, and you're getting the ability to Blood Surge on Khan, which is really good. There's lots of good things about that build as well. However, I think a lot of Khan's utility comes from the fact that he's a 100-point trading piece that's probably one of the more effective trading pieces in the game, because even when he dies, he trades. Whereas there's some times where you go, I'm going to trade this, and they interrupt, or they fight first, or, whatever it be. You've jumped onto an objective and they've charged you, and they're trading into you, but you get no value from the trade. Whereas Khan always gets value from the trade. So I love Khan for that value. And as a result, I prefer him just on his own. And to be honest, I think he prefers being on his own anyway. He doesn't really trust his brothers in arms. So yeah, it's lore friendly, and I believe competitively advantageous to run him on his own, which is perfect. That's what you want in the game. You want the game to be, competitively viable, but also, lore accurate. So that's really cool. I like that. What else we got? We got Lord Invocatus. Again, I think he's been in almost every competitive World Leaders list, and I don't see that changing. His scout move is critical, whether it be scouting up your Exalted 8-bound, whether it be scouting Berserkers, whether it be scouting your Terminators. There's lots of good candidates to receive his scout moves. Even things like Jackals. Being able to go, okay, cool, let's say your opponent deploys hyper-conservatively, and you know that you're just not going to be charging them turn 1, right? They're deployed real far back. And then you get turn 1, right? What you can do is you go, cool, I'm going to scout forward this second unit of jackals. I've got one holding my backfield so that I can sticky it. This second unit, I'm going to scout that one forward. Then it's going to be able to move into the center. And it's either going to deploy teleport homers, it's going to cleanse, it's going to, get area denial, whatever you need. And then all the rest of your army just moves into staging positions where they're all hidden. And now your opponent deployed hyper conservatively to hide from you, but they didn't do it in such a way where they're going to be able to kill you on the return because you were able to just throw out a 70-point unit of jackals or 65-point unit of jackals to get that center objective. And now, if they don't come in and kill them, you're going to sticky the center, so they have to respond. And if they just shoot you off of it, you're going to be able to sticky the objective. And if they move bodies onto it so that they can kill you off of it in melee and stop you from controlling the objective, well, now they've just sent a unit out into the middle that you're going to respond with 8-bound or whatever your berserkers or whatever you have in your list. So being able to do that is really cool. And the reason that that's unlocked by Lord Invocatus is because often you can't just move onto an objective to cleanse or move into the center to deploy teleport homers with a 6-inch move. And if you advance, you can't do an action. So the scout move essentially gives you a 12-inch move on those jackals in the first turn, which does give you sufficient movement to get on those objectives. Another real cool way that you can use his scout move is generally it's a rectangle board, you're deploying in one corner, they're deploying in the other. The corner that's directly above or below you, I refer to as your safe objective, because it's the objective that's furthest away from your opponent's deployment. And therefore it's the easiest one to defend. And typically it's relatively well protected with terrain, depending on, of course, your terrain format for your event. But it's generally pretty well protected. And that safe objective, being able to scout move jackals onto that and sticky that in the first turn is also really, really good, because now you've got jackals sticking your home and then in your scout move, and then you move onto that safe objective. And now in your opponent's turn, they do blah, blah, blah. They don't kill those jackals because how are they going to kill those jackals? They're on your safe objective. And then when you start in your second turn, both of your backfield objectives are sticky. And now, if you draw, investigate signals, you've got 2 units of jackals that can both move back into the corners and investigate. Or if you don't, or if you drew that maybe in the first turn or whatever, you're now free to push up with those jackals, create big move blocks so they can't get onto those objectives, and you still score the points. So the scout move just unlocks so many different strategies and so many different tactics that I think Lord Invocatus is still an absolute must-take. And so, yeah, he's sick, I guess, is the summary there. We've got the Chaos Spawn, 65 points. They're still really cool. They're way tougher than they should be for the points cost. They're a really good example of what I call a sponge, where basically what they are, they don't do particularly high damage, but they're cheap and they take more points worth of investment to kill than they cost. So you go, cool, they're 65 points. If I put them on an objective that's out of line of sight, you are not killing that with less than 65 points. You're going to have to throw a 120, 130 point unit in to kill that, maybe even more. And as a result, this unit is really effective at just going onto objectives early in the game, baiting your opponent out, because like I said with the every other unit, if they shoot you off the objective, you sticky it, so they have to combat you, which means they have to come closer to you. And this is one of the things where the Terminators, and I'm going to talk about them in detail later, but the Terminator's biggest weakness, most people say, is that they're just too slow, right? But the problem is if you think Terminators are just too slow, in my opinion, you're just not playing them right. Because the idea is you want to bait your opponent into coming to you. So you go, cool, Terminators is behind this ruin here, and then I throw my spawn onto the middle objective. If you shoot the spawn off, I'm going to sticky it and control it anyway. So you have to put models on that center objective. But if you put them on that center objective, my Terminators can move out, advance and charge, and they can hit you. And now I've killed you off the middle, and now I have Terminators in the middle. And the Terminators are probably still out of line of sight there. So it's like, well, now what are they going to fucking do? They're going to charge the Terminators and try to kill them? Like, that's way harder than charging a unit of 8-bound to try to kill it. So, yeah. The spawn unlock the slower units in the army. Same goes for like a Mauler Fiend, where it's like the Mauler Fiend, even though it's really fast, it is limited by terrain. Whereas if you go, well, I've got my, my Terminators behind the ruin here, or my Mauler Fiend behind the ruin here. I got my spawn on the objective. If you hop on that objective, my Mauler Fiend is close enough that he can move his 9 inches that way, 3 inches that way, whatever you need to do to get around the ruin and charge things. So the 8-bound are really good missiles that can go in deep and do damage. But if you play the game more cagey and more in the idea of trading units, the Mauler Fiends and things like that are really good because you can use spawn to bait them out. Now we've got the 2 variants of the Demon Prince. I'll be honest, I don't really like either of these guys. I know there's a few people that take them and, all more power to them. But for me personally, I just think they're too expensive. Like, for 200 points, you can get a unit of 10 Khorne Berserkers, and you can put +1 to wound on those, and they're going to kill way more than a Demon Prince, And they can run through walls and everything like that, so they're way faster than a Demon Prince, so they're faster and they hit harder, and arguably they're harder to kill than a Demon Prince, because the Demon Prince has the 2-up saves and the invulnerable saves and, higher toughness and whatnot, but he's only one model, a couple of Doom Bolts and he's just gone from existence, a couple of well-placed multi-melter shots and he's just dead. So I think he's a liability, and I think he's too expensive to be as vulnerable as he is, and his damage isn't enticing enough for me to bear that cost. Whereas like a Mauler Fiend, it's easier to kill than a Demon Prince because it doesn't have the 2-up save, it doesn't have the 4-up invulnerable save, etc., etc. But, and like if you're comparing it to the Flying Demon Prince, it can't fly, he can. So there's lots of reasons why the Flying Demon Prince is better than a Mauler Fiend. But the Mauler Fiend, its damage output is fucked. Especially if the target has taken damage. So first off, the Mauler Fiend gives you the, comparing it to the Demon Prince, it gives you the tank shock, it gives you the the big power fists that are d6 +1 damage, or is it +1 or +2? Either way, the high damage power fists, and the lasher tendrils if you take them as well for just a shit ton of additional attacks. Like, that's way more powerful than a Demon Prince in combat, and it's now 60 points cheaper. So it's like, why the fuck were people taking the Demon Prince? Especially the flying one doesn't have any rules that synergize particularly well. Like, they don't buff nearby units or anything like that. The best thing that they got is that they can reroll wounds against the target, but only one target, and your opponent just goes, cool. Who did you select as your target? Cool. Your Demon Prince is there. The target you get rerolls is fucking other side of the board, right? So as a result, your Demon Prince, your Flying Demon Prince, is not likely to get massive utility out of that rule if your opponent doesn't want you to. And he doesn't really buff things. And then the foot slugging one, like, sure, he can increase the invulnerable save on your 8-bound from a 5-up to a 4-up, but the problem is he's never going to be anywhere near your 8-bound because he's foot slugging and can't go through walls, so he's slow as fuck. Whereas your 8-bound, they're fast as fuck, so they're going to be on the other side of the board. They're never going to be benefiting from it. And if you have him with a unit of 8-bound and you're moving it around like a death ball, you're not getting what the 8-bound are best for, which is their speed. And if you want a death ball, that's when you take Terminators. So, yeah, I just think, unfortunately, both Demon Princes, as far as I'm concerned, fall relatively flat on their face. I'm just going to take a quick 20-second, 30-second break to take a piss. So I'm just going to chuck an add-on for you guys. And we are back. Thank you for your patience there. Just caught up with some of the comments here as well. There was one question in there that I think is particularly relevant to answer now, and that is that yes, we will be talking about Chaos Space Marines points as well. So it's going to be quite a long stream, but yes, we'll absolutely be talking about the Chaos Space Marines because there's some really, really spicy stuff in there. But you know, I'm working on World Leaders at the moment, so I want to get them the conversation about them done first. But yes, so stick around for those. We're nearly through the Berserker, the World Leaders, so we'll be ticking over to that very shortly. I also want to take this quick opportunity to talk about the raffle. You would have seen the ad at the very start if you were around from the start of the stream. If you've just joined us now, I've got a raffle. There's a link in the description for where you can get that. Basically, you can buy a bunch of raffle tickets and it gives you an opportunity to win some neoprene objective markers like this one I'm using as my mouse pad. So you can get those, and there's also my Blog for the Blood God dice, really cool looking red and black dice. There'll be 50 dice and a set of 6 objective markers, and it all goes towards supporting my trip to Europe this year for the the World Team Championships, and also supporting, got a very sick cat, he's recently been diagnosed with cancer, so there's a lot of bills there, and that's putting me under significant financial stress, so any support that you guys can provide would be greatly appreciated, and the raffle is a great way to show that support and get something back in return, and also have a little bit of fun with some exciting raffles. I know 40k players, we like to roll the dice, so to speak, on our luck, so joining a raffle is a cool way to sort of do that. Anyway, these Terminators, I'm going to give them a minute for the bases to dry, and then I'm going to do start doing some trim, some gold fucking trim, which is probably going to take me the rest of the video just to get the gold trim done. So let's power on, and let's talk about the rest of the units in this balanced data slate. So what do we got? We've got, sorry, I'm just going to scooch over a bit. We've got the Defiler. I actually think for its points, it's actually not bad. It's not trash. My issue with the model is that it's borderline unplayably ugly, and it's also really hard to maneuver around terrain and things, especially on the WTC style terrain. It can be really hard to maneuver, and it's really awkward when placing models around it, and is the claw hanging over that terrain piece, and blah blah blah. It's a frustrating model. It's not fun to play. But I do like it in a World Leaders army because it has some shooting capacity, some melee capacity. You know, the ability to advance and charge on it is really cool. You know, the ability to get 6 up film and pain on it is quite good. So there's lots of really cool things about the Defiler. But unfortunately, the model for me just makes it a bit of a deal breaker. Forge Fiends, 145 points. They're pretty good. They're really good at obviously into your 3 wound meta. So if Chaos Space Marine Chosen, Blade Guard. What are they called? The Sword Brethren, the Terminators everywhere, like all of those sorts of things. The Forge Fiend is quite good into. So yeah, I don't hate 1 or 2 of those, depending on your list. I don't think they're in the world where you'd take lots of them, but a couple of them. One of the things about the World Leaders is getting a little bit of shooting into the list actually provides a lot more value than you'd think, because it forces your opponent to play 2 games. Whereas if you don't have any shooting, all they have to do is stay out of your charge range. That's all they have to do, right? Whereas if you have some shooting, they have to stay out of your charge range and out of your line of sight. That becomes significantly more difficult to do. And it forces more mental bandwidth expenditure on your opponent's behalf. They have to think more about where they're placing things because they don't want to get shot. If you've got one of them in reserves and you know that it's going to come on turn 2, it's going to get firing angles, they have to worry about trying to screen that thing out so that you don't get to shoot their things, and it just makes it way harder for your opponent, way harder. And sometimes they won't have an option, because if they want to be out of your line of sight, they're going to have to move up a little bit to be inside this ruin. But if they move up into that ruin, they put themselves within charge range of your 8-bound, etc. So you can get them between a rock and a hard place if you have a little bit of shooting in the list. And some of our best shooting, I think, comes from the Forge Fiend. So I like a Forge Fiend, 1 in reserves or 2, and you put 1 on the table and 1 in reserves, and that way they have to deploy in such a way that the Forge Fiend isn't just going to be able to move out and blap something turn 1. And they also have to spend their first turn setting up screens so that you can't, on your second turn, go in and blap them with the one that's in reserve. You can create some really interesting challenges with a couple of Forge Fiends. Hellbrute down to 130. Hellbrute's really, really interesting. I like them with the double fists and double flamers. I think that unit's actually kind of scary. And again, this is something that can go in reserves. You can rapid ingress it off the side somewhere, or you can just deep strike it near Angron and go for an 8-inch charge. And the Hellbrute's really good because basically the way its rule works, and I know there's a lot of people out there that still question this, but they are wrong, is that every time it fights, does its damage, and then every time your opponent allocates attacks onto you, after they're finished resolving their attacks, you get to fight again. This is just how it works, and I'm not looking to get into a rules debate here, but it works. And it's really powerful because basically what it allows you to do is go, cool, let's say there's 5 Tactical Marines, and then behind that's a Rhino, right? And in that Rhino is some more Tactical Marines. You can go, cool, I'm going to charge the Tactical Marines. Let's say you get unlucky and you only kill 4 of them, right? There's 1 left. Well, that one guy has to fight you, so he fights you. Then you get to fight again. So you kill him, and then you pile in to the Rhino that's behind it. Now that Rhino has to fight you. So you get to fight it back. Let's say you kill the Rhino, it explodes, the guys disembark out, you pile into those guys. Now they have to fight you, and you can fight again. And basically you can just keep doing that over and over and over. It can be tricky if your opponent pulls casualties in an intelligent way, or if they, when they're disembarking from transport, they make sure that they're outside of 4 inches of you, which can be hard to do depending on how the Rhino is oriented. If you hit it from the side, it's very hard for them to deploy outside because the Rhino is not wide enough. But it can be done depending on where the models are placed and whatnot. But the point is that the Hellbrute unlocks a really interesting combo style of play, and your opponent has to respect it. And basically what this means is they're not going to be able to go, cool, I'm going to clump up all my models here so that I'm as far away from all your stuff as possible, or so that I'm layered so that you can only charge the front unit or something like that. Because you just go, cool, the Hellbrute's just going to fight again and again and again and again. So they have to spread their units out a lot more, and then that allows you to pick them off one by one in ways where you remain safe. So Hellbrute, really interesting in the dynamic that it forces. Helldrake, we already discussed this at the start of the video. Absolute rubbish, worst unit in the game by far. The World is land rate at 240 points. Again, this one I think is very terrain dependent, like the Lord of Skulls. If you're playing on WTC terrain, this unit is unplayably bad. It doesn't work. But if you're playing it on terrain where you can maneuver it around, it's actually pretty cool. There's some cool stuff you can do with it. First of all, it's tough and it brings some shooting. So like I said, it forces your opponent to factor in your shooting, keeps them honest. And also, it can be used in conjunction with your 8-bound really well. So one of the things that people often do is they'll have like some scouts or some infiltrators or some kind of forward deploying unit. They'll deploy that 9 inches from your deployment zone, so you can't use your scout move effectively to get past them, right? So what you can then do is you can use your scout move to get back in your land raider. Then if they go first, they're not going to hurt your 8-bound. And then from that land raider, you can disembark out your 3, then move your 9, plus 2 if you've got your blessings up. So now you're moving 11, plus the 3, so you're moving 14 inches. Then you're advancing at auto 6, so you're going 20 inches and then charging. So that's 20 inches and then charging with no scout move. So you can do that turn 3. That's huge. Whereas normally you're only getting the 17. So the land raider can be used to launch 8-bound, which is really good, and it also protects the 8-bound. Your opponent can't just go, cool, I'm just going to drop down and shoot your 8-bound, because they're inside a land raider. They're really tough. So that's a really important use of it. The other really important use of it is getting around people's reactive moves. Because basically, if your opponent ends a normal move within 9 inches of of a lot of these types of things, they can reactively move and then they just move away. So if your 8-bound move up to them, they can go, cool, I'm moving 6 inches away. And if you were within, say, 4 inches of them, well, now it's a 10-inch charge. And that's just not going to happen, right? Which means that you're going to require multiple units of 8-bound to try to play around their react. It's really frustrating and really annoying. Whereas what the Land Raider allows you to do is the Land Raider allows you to move it 10 inches. It ends its move outside of 9. Then you disembark 3 inches out. So now you're just outside of 6 inches, and they don't get to reactive move from your disembark because the disembark itself is not a normal move, which means that they can't reactive move, which means your 8-bound are now 6 inches away. And if Angron's nearby, +1 aura, now it's 5-inch charge. If you have a CP in your pocket for a potential reroll, you're going to make that charge. And as a result, you're going to go in and do damage. So I really like the Land Raider. The other good thing about the Land Raider is because it's not a dedicated transport, you don't have to deploy anything inside of it. So you can just deploy the Land Raider on your objective. It's also a really big base, like big model, which is a detriment in a lot of ways, but it's also really good in that you can just go bonk on top of an objective. It's very hard for your opponent to get onto it because they, if you put it towards the front, sideways, they're gonna have to go around to get models on the objective, which means they can't just walk on and touch it and take it from your Land Raider. It's actually very hard. Whereas if you put something like a Rhino on an objective, it's very easy for your opponent to just go, cool, it's OC2, I'm going to put 2 Tactical Marines on there, which is OC4, and now I take that objective from you. Whereas the Land Raider, it's like, wow, how do I get on that objective? So Land Raider is really cool. They unlock a few interesting techniques and interesting tricks. The World Leader's Lord on Juggernaut, 100 points. I think he's great with the Favourite of Khorne. I did a video on this, but I think Favourite of Khorne is still absolutely must take. It's really, really important. The reason I think that is because World Leaders often rely on having what I call a go turn. And that's where you go, cool, I've spent my first turn, I've deployed in such a way that you're terrified of my Alpha Strike. So you fall back, you hide everything out of my line of sight, out of my range, right? So I can't hit you on turn 1. So if I get first turn, I'm going to use my scout moves and use my movement phase to make sure that I'm as far forward as I can be whilst not being visible and not being within your charge range, right? So now I'm not visible, not within your charge range, everything's hidden behind this ruin here, and this ruin here, and this ruin here. And then it ticks over to your opponent's turn. Now they're in a tricky spot because if they can't shoot you, they can't charge you. But if they stay where they are, they're not scoring any victory points because they're not on any objectives, right? So they have to come out and they have to start pressuring. And then in your turn 2, that is your go turn. And that's when you go, cool, I need advance and charge so that every single one of my units gets into combat. And then I go, cool, now I just do massive, irreparable damage to my opponent. And if you don't have advance and charge on that key turn, and now all of a sudden instead of 6 or 7 combats happening, it's only 2 or 3 combats happen because you didn't get that you didn't get that auto 6 on Angron, and therefore he wasn't able to clear over their screens and charge their backfield. You didn't get those 2, 3s, and 4s on your advance rolls on all of your 8-bound, and therefore a couple of them don't make their charges. They don't connect because your opponent stayed further back, right? If you don't get those and then you don't get your go turn, you only kill some of their stuff, and then they have most of their army left, and then they blast everything that came out, you're fucked. So I think having it specifically to make sure that on the turn that you need it, you do get the advance and charge is absolutely critical. The only other time that I use it is if it's trying to resurrect Angron and you have multiple units of Jackals on objectives. You don't want to just... You're fishing for a natural 666, and you have 1 reroll, and then a couple of rerolls from your Jackals. You're not going to waste it on that without the Jackals. Whereas if you do have the Jackals, you're like, cool, I can roll the whole dice, then I can reroll the whole dice, then I can reroll multiple dice for the Jackals. Now you're getting essentially 3 goes, then it's worth it. But generally speaking, I save it for that go turn when I need to get advance and charge. If you don't need it because you've got it naturally and therefore it's later in the game, your stuff's all up in their face, so you're not needing advance and charge in turns 3 and 4. You're generally only going to need it turns 1 and 2. Then you're probably fine with just, using it on a reroll for Angron or something like that. But yeah, I think it's critical. I think it's a must take. So what else have we got here with the Master of Executions? Again, we've discussed him when we talked about Berserkers. I think he's fantastic. Glavemo is still fantastic, and also if you're running 2 units of Berserkers instead of the Juggerlord with Favored, I run the second unit with Favored. So you got 1 Master of Executions with Favored, 1 with the Glaive, and they go together to make 2 units of 10 Berserkers that fight first, have precision, have dev wounds, and you're generally going to throw the Glaive Mo out first. He's going to do heavy damage, and then the next turn you're going to throw out the Favored Mo. Yeah, really effective combo. You can do that with a single Rhino too, which is kind of interesting. You can deploy 1 unit behind the Rhino, 1 unit in the Rhino, and then what you do is you disembark out 3, send that unit of Berserkers with the Glaive Mo, then the Rhino moves after that, and then these Berserkers move and jump in the Rhino, or jump in the Rhino and then the Rhino moves either way. Now you got a second Rhino. It's effectively like having a second Rhino full of Berserkers, but you only paid for one Rhino. So that's a really cool way to do it. And then I like to run Khan solo inside that same Rhino, because that has transport capacity of 12. So you can run 10 Berserkers with Mo and Khan in that Rhino. And that means if your opponent throws out something small or something that you need Khan's specific tricks to beat, well, you can just disembark Khan out and you can go get it done. Next, we've got the World Eater's Mauler Fiend. So this one's really exciting, going down to 140 now. When 10th edition dropped, I went to the World Team Championships, and I ran 2 Mauler Fiends back when they were 175 points each. And back then, that was in the world where we had Eldar running amok, we had Desolation Marines running amok, we had like all this really crazy stuff, and I still back then found immense value in Mauler Fiends. And now that they're 140 points, I think they're almost an auto-include. They're really, really good. They unlock Tank Shock, which is absolutely fantastic on the Mauler Fiend. It's almost a guaranteed 6 mortal wounds for 1 CP. That's wild. It allows you to do things like, if they've got a unit of 5 plebs on an objective, you can charge them, you can Tank Shock them, they die to the Tank Shock, and then you can, in your fight phase, you can pile into something and then hit it, so you can kill 2 units that way. Really effective. Or if you're going up against something big, like let's say they've got Magnus and he's just sitting on an objective somewhere, you go, cool, I'm going to charge the Mauler Fiend in, I'm going to Tank Shock him, which means he takes 6 mortals. Then when I fight him, I get +1 to hit because my target has taken damage, which means I'm hitting on 2s with all those power fists. That one Mauler Fiend probably kills Magnus, or it gets damn close. So being able to go, I've got a 140 point unit in my army that is an answer to Magnus, that's wild. And yes, they can kill it with Doom Bolts and whatever, but chances are those things are targeting Angron. So having a Mauler Fiend in your list is fantastic, and I probably am going to run 2, maybe 1, maybe 2, but they're really good. And I think their existence kind of outshine the Hellbrute because they do a very similar thing, but they're just way better. They're tougher, they hit harder, they're faster, they're just better. So I like the Mauler Fiends, they're fantastic. We've got the 2 Predator variants. It's kind of disappointing that they didn't go down. I understand that the Chaos Space Marine ones are really good and the Ironstorm ones are really good, so therefore Predators as a unit probably don't need to go down in points, but we don't really get any benefits on our Predators, so it would be nice if our Predators went down a little bit to compensate for that. And as a result, I don't think we weren't taking Predators before and we're not taking them now. I think they're just going to sit on the shelf, and I think you'd be better off with a Forge Fiend. If you can scrape the extra 15 points to get a Forge Fiend in your list, that's way better than a Predator. So, yep, we've got the Rhino, no changes. Rhinos are fantastic. I think they're one of the most underrated units in the game. The things that they can do, the way that they unlock. Like, if you compare them to a unit of Jackals, right? They're going to be tougher to kill than a unit of Jackals because it's an armored vehicle. And it's faster than a unit of Jackals because it's, a vehicle. It's got the 12-inch move. And also, it can be used as a staging position for your other units. There's often times when I will, turn 1, I'll launch out my Berserkers, or turn 2, I'll launch out my Berserkers and kill something. And by that point, the Jackals have stickied their home objective, so the Jackals will jump into the Rhino, and then the Jackals can launch out into a midfield objective later. So there's some really interesting stuff you can do with Rhinos, so they're really, really cool. They also allow you to absorb Overwatch because you can charge them in first, and now your opponent's tagged, and therefore they can't Overwatch your other stuff. You can use them to force your opponent to fight certain things. So say you're going into somebody who has fights first, you can go, cool, I'm going to charge the Rhino in, and then I'm going to charge the rest of the unit on this side. And now most of this stuff will have to pile in closer to the Rhino, and therefore have to hit the Rhino, which means they're not going to hit my Berserkers, which means when they interrupt, they either interrupt or they fight first, they're not killing all your Berserkers, and then your Berserkers are able to just go Vushka and wipe the unit. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff you can do with Rhinos. I might actually do a Rhino Masterclass video for you guys, just to sort of get the models out on the table and really break these examples down. So yeah, Rhinos, absolutely ripper of a unit. And now we get on to my personal hot take, which is the World Eater's Terminator Squad. Now this unit, I know I touched on it a little bit throughout whilst discussing other units, but the World Eater's Terminators are fantastic. Now, the first thing I'm going to address is the most common criticism of them, which is that they quote-unquote don't have a data sheet ability. There's so many people that say that they just don't have a data sheet ability because it doesn't activate until they've taken damage, blah, 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 blah. That's just wrong. Like, they do have a data sheet ability, and it is really good, because the thing is if you take a unit of 10, it's tough enough that nobody's really killing the whole unit of 10 in one volley, unless you've completely misplayed it. You've just left it out in the open, not in cover, just there. Then of course people are going to kill it all in one go. But if you play conservatively with it, and maybe you make it so there's 3 Terminators out in the open and the other 7 are out of line of sight, and your opponent shoots you, and then you go, cool, I'm going to remove those 3, and now you can't shoot me anymore. And now in the next turn I've got 7 Terminators that all get +1 to hit, so now they're hitting on 2s with strength 10 power fists. That's actually pretty wild, right? And so that's really, really effective. But the thing I like about them is that they are way tougher than you'd think. So there's certain things in the meta, Custodies fighting first, which obviously they're gone now, but Custodies fighting first was one thing. The Death Guard fighting first, things that have savage overwatch like a Land Raider Redeemer, or the Death Guard, or there's tons and tons of things that have really, really savage overwatch. The Doom Stalker dudes, the Necron guys, whatever they're called. There's tons of things that have really savage overwatch, right? If you have a unit of 6 Exalted 8-bound and you move out and they overwatch and they kill 4, right? Now you have 2 guys left that make it into combat, and those 2 guys are not going to be enough to kill most targets, right? Even something small like a Rhino doesn't always die to 2 Exalted 8-bound. However, if you go his 10 Terminators and they kill 4, which first of all, they're not as likely to kill the Terminators, they are tougher than the 8-bound. I did the maths on this, it's pretty close, but generally speaking, a 2-up save in cover with a 4-up invulnerable save as a fallback and a 6-up Feel No Pain is better than a 3-up save with a 5-up invulnerable save and a 5-up Feel No Pain. So the Terminators are tougher per model. So let's say they kill the four guys. Well, now you have 6 Terminators that are going to make it into combat. That's all 6 guys with their power fists. That hits almost as hard as an untouched unit of Exalted 8-bound. So now you're essentially going in and you're getting free ignores Overwatch, in a way, right? I know the Terminators are a bit more expensive than the Exalted 8-bound as well, so that's something that you need to factor in. But ultimately, their ability to do that and absorb the Overwatch and then still go in, and then because they lost casualties to the Overwatch, they get their +1 to hit now, which means that they're going in doing heavy damage. That makes them really attractive. Further to that, if you have an opponent that has something that has fights first, might be a unit of Sword Brethren with a Judicia in it, it might be a unit of Plague Marines with a whatever is called in it. Whatever it is, there's tons of armies have access to fights first in various ways. If you charge them and then they fight first and they kill all they have to do is kill 1 Terminator, and now your special rule activates and you're hitting on 2s. So that their special rule does activate quite often. Almost every game it's going to activate. And the people who are saying, but it doesn't happen until they've taken casualties, those people are just playing the unit wrong. They're not a unit of 8-bound. 8-bound are something that go in at full health and they go in and they hit something and they kill it, right? Whereas the Terminators, their whole thing is that they're a brawler. They take the punch, then they dish the punch, then they take a punch, then they dish a punch, right? 8-bound don't play that way. 8-bound go in and they just hit something, kill it dead, and then, they take a pretty heavy commitment to take down because they are toughness 6 with a 5-up Feel No Pain, but they will die. People will just go, cool, I'm moving a couple of tanks out and I'm going to go, and I'm going to kill them, right? So, whereas that doesn't work with the Terminators. If those Terminators are in cover and then all of a sudden those AP 1 shots, you're getting 2-up saves against AP 2, you're getting 3-up saves with a 6-up Feel No Pain, it's really hard for them to kill you. And the fact that you've got 10 of them is also really relevant because it means as they kill you, every one that you lose isn't as critical. Whereas 6 Exalted 8-bound, every one that you lose is, a heavy chunk, it's 16% of your damage is gone. Whereas the Terminators, it's only 10% of your damage is gone. So it's not as devastating when you take casualties. And as you take the casualties, you get the buffs. So that's really, really cool. Also, when they do get down to having 4 or less, now they're getting +1 to wound as well. which means that those 4 that you have left, as they've chipped you down, now they're actually just fucking shit up, and you don't have to spend the stratagems to do the damage. So I love the Terminators. I think they're fantastic. They also provide some shooting, which granted, you're not going to use it often because they're relatively slow, so you're likely to be using advance and charge on them. However, in those later turns, instead of advance and charge, you can pick the +2 move. So now you've got Terminators that are moving 7 inches and then charging things, which is really fast, and putting down a whole bunch of bullets, which is really good into certain things because you're able to soften them up before you go in, or you're able to shoot that unit before you charge that unit. They allow you to, if there's that one model running away that, say your regular 8-bound hit a unit and killed it down to 1 guy left, you don't want to have to send an entire unit of 8-bound to go hunt that one guy. But the Terminators can move over and shoot that one guy dead and then charge something else. So they're fantastic. They are fantastic. Being able to rapid ingress them is also really good because if you rapid ingress and then you charge from there, you got a 5-inch move, then auto 6 advance, which on the World Eaters Terminators, auto 6 advance more than doubles their move, right? And then if you put +2 move on them as well, they're now dropping down. They're moving 7 plus, they're moving 13 inches. That's so fast. People look at the Terminators and they think, oh, it's slow. My goal is to play around it. Good luck. These guys are way faster than your traditional Terminator. They're actually kind of like jump pack guys. They're really fast. They're not 8-bound fast, but later in the game, you don't need to be 8-bound fast. I think you use the 8-bound to scare your opponent, get them to hide, and then you can use your Terminator's rapid ingress in and go do your damage that way. And often you're rapid ingressing your exalted 8-bound and then charging from there anyway, so the Terminators are effectively the same speed in that regard. So I really like the Terminators. I think they're fantastic, and I'm running them at the Australian Team Championships that's coming up this weekend with the old points. So I was running them when it was 380 points for a unit of 6. Now that it's 360, it's like they're actually kind of comparable to Exalted 8-bound in price, and I think their 10 Terminators is way better than 6 Exalted 8-bound. So there's also a world where you take multiple units of Terminators. Maybe you take 2. One of them gets a scout move from Lord Invocatus, because now it's scouting up 6 inches. Then, if you have advance and charge, it's then moving 11 inches from there. So it's moving 17 inches turn 1 and then charging things. That's pretty good. Because it's getting a scout move of 6, an auto advance of 6, a movement of 5. Oh, it's moving 19, because you can get the +2 to move. So you can move 19 inches with Terminators turn 1. And then charge your opponent. Who's going to... people will see that coming because it's World Eaters, but if they don't have the capacity to screen that out, and you just go, cool, I've got 1 unit of Terminators here and 1 unit of 8-bound, Exalted 8-bound here, they're my 2 things that are going to get Scout Move from Lord Invocatus, and then I got another unit of Terminators in Deep Strike, and it's like your opponent has to hide really deep to prevent the 8-bound and the Terminators from getting them. If they don't have the capacity to screen you out, they're just fucked. And if they do, you can then go, cool, my Terminator's going to move up. They're going to shoot that unit of scouts and kill it. And that way I don't have to send something out there. I'm going to shoot them and then remain safe. And then this 8-bound unit's going to move up. And now all of a sudden you've got these big bully units that are controlling the middle of the table, that are tough, they do damage, and they have the versatility with the shooting and the combat. I just think they're an absolutely ripper of a unit. So I think people are sleeping on those Terminators. Those Terminators are going to rock the meta. I think as people start to realize what's happening here, they're going to absolutely rock the meta. So that summarizes the World Eaters Index. So thank you for tuning in for that. What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, just a real short ad break, and then we're going to jump over, talk about Chaos Space Marines. But I just want to remind you guys, if you do have any questions, chuck them in the comments section. Put a super chat on it, and I'll answer it then and there. And then at the end of the video, I'll also go through and I'll just read through the comments, and we'll have a bit of a conversation as well. And in these ad breaks, whilst I'm taking a piss, I will also read those comments so that we can, have a bit of a conversation, because I want to make this a bit of a dialogue, not just me ranting at a camera. I want to get you guys involved in the conversation as well. So let's have a quick ad break, and then we'll jump into talking about the Chaos Space Marines and their points cost updates. Which ad do I want to play? Let's play the ad for my Patreon.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world. especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.
Blog for the Blood God exclusive high quality dice. Blog for the Blood God exclusive high quality dice. Blog for the Blood God exclusive high quality dice. Hi, I'm Dean Simbeck, President and CEO of Blog for the Blood God's exclusive high quality dice warehouse and emporium. Due to a shipping error, I'm currently overstocked with Blog for the Blood God exclusive high quality dice, and I'm passing the savings on to you! Roll 9-inch charges, pass invulnerable saves, roll high for damage, and score lots of hits. Check out the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today. Alrighty guys, we are back, and we are painting gold trim whilst talking about Chaos Space Marines. And this paint is fucking rat shit. Okay, cool. Let's tick over to Chaos Space Marines in here. They're up here somewhere, I think. Death Guard. Index Chaos Space Marines. So what we'll do here is instead of going through every unit, because there haven't been much changes for these guys for a while, and we touched on that recently when we did have the previous data slate change. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to talk about the units that changed. Just a reminder, if you do have a particular question you want answered, chuck a super chat in there. You can throw $1 and that'll highlight the question, and I'll make sure to answer that, and I'll go through that now and answer some questions. But that guarantees that your comment's not going to get missed. And then at the end of the video, I'll go through and I'll pick out a couple of interesting, regular comments and read those. So we'll do that in a moment. But just a reminder that that's a great way that you can show your support for the channel as well as getting your questions read. And the other thing I will quickly mention before we keep going is the Blog for the Blood God raffle. If you want to pick up some objective markers and some dice, you can buy tickets to go in the draw to win those. And it's a great way to help me because this year I'm going to Europe for the WTC World Championships, and also unfortunately my cat has recently been diagnosed with cancer, which is very expensive treatment. So any help that you can provide is very, very much appreciated. So with that being said, let's ask some of these questions, answer some of these questions. We've got, let me just make sure I don't miss any. We've got, yes, my lord, for CSM, are the bolt pistols ever worth taking over plasma? No, is the short answer to that. I can't imagine a world where you wouldn't take the plasma pistols. No, it's always plasma pistols. Same goes for the berserkers. They can take up to 2 plasma pistols, I think, in the unit. Or is it 3 if you take a unit of 10, because you can take 2 on the chain guys and then 1 on the sergeant. You always take them. You always take them. Things like melter guns and stuff is a little bit more questionable because you can take the chainsword and a bolt pistol, which if you're planning on going in and doing melee damage, you want that reroll hits and wounds when you're on an objective. That's really interesting when you're doing chainsword attacks. Whereas if you have a melter gun guy, now you don't get that additional attack and you don't get the AP1 in melee, which means he's significantly worse. So I think there is an argument for taking no heavy weapons, no special weapons, just all combat for Chaos Space Marines. But for World Leaders, you definitely want to take all of the upgrades. Then we've got Ditchwalker, $10 thank you. Thanks, mate. I really do appreciate that. That's great. No comment attached, just a nice little donation. That's awesome. Thanks, mate. I do appreciate it greatly. Then we've got Nucky Thompson, $5 super chat here, and he has any ideas for supporting a CSM build around triple Vindicators? Love from New York City. Yes, there's tons of the triple Vindicator build, and we'll get into this when we go through the points cost updates. But I think that is the path forward for Chaos Space Marines. Vindicators are tough as nails with a 2-up armor, toughness 11. You put that thing in cover, it's as tough as Angron, and it shoots fantastic. So these things are really, really good units. I love the Vindicator. But it does have some drawbacks. So what we'll do is we'll talk about some of the ways that you can sort of mitigate that. One of them is that it's comparatively slow and it's not a melee monster, right? And it's relatively low OC. So basically what you want to do is you want to use your Vindicators as your anvils that are something that's tough, that's going to contribute damage over the long term, and also something that's going to be able to focus fire down a big thing, right? You might go 2 Vindicators on the board, one of them in reserves, and then you basically position yourself so that you can come out, you can blast things. If they're trying to hide from you, the one in reserves can come on and it can blast things, and you can sort of focus fire things down where you go, these 2 are going to hit Magnus and blow him up, right? But what you need is something that can go onto objectives and take them off your opponent. It's all well and good to shoot your opponent off an objective, but you want to simultaneously get on the objective yourself. So this is where I think things like the just like Raptors, Warp Talons, fast disposable units that can go out onto an objective. So you go, cool, they've got a unit of, whatever, something relatively tough. Let's say they got some 8-bound on an objective. You go, cool, I'm going to move my Raptors on, and then I'm going to shoot you with a Vindicator and blow you up, and now I've taken the objective. So you need to have the Vindicator to do the damage, but you need something else that's going to stage on that objective. So that's the way that I think the Chaos Space Marine lists are going to work going forward. I'm still a big fan of the Chaos Space Marine Terminator build with Abaddon in it, but we'll talk about that in a moment as well. But yeah, thanks heaps for the question. And yeah, if anybody else has any questions that they want me to answer, now before we get into the meat and gravy, so to speak, chuck those super chats in. Just $1 is enough to highlight the comment, and then I can respond to it in kind. I think it's also worth noting at this point that these points costs for Chaos Space Marines are likely to be the points costs that we have for the new codex, because I don't think we're going to get any points cost updates for the next 3 months, and well, obviously not. And the codex is slated to be arrive within 3 months. So it'll be interesting to see what these points costs mean with a new set of stratagems and a new set of detachments. I'm actually planning to do a stream like this where I'm going to write a Chaos Space Marine Codex from scratch, where basically we're going to assume all the data sheets say the same, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit there and I'm going to talk about what my predictions are for the detachments and the stratagems that we're going to gain, and we're going to do that on the screen there. So we're going to write it together, we can have a conversation. I think that's going to be a ton of fun. We'll kick back, have some drinks, and theorize, what does the Alpha Legion detachment look like? Is it going to be kind of like a Grey Knight, uppy-downy kind of one? And if that's the case, are they going to have a lone-op stratagem? We'll talk about all that sort of stuff, and what we'll do is we'll write it all down so that at the end of that video, we have a document that is our predictions for the Chaos Space Marine book, and then when it does come out, we'll be able to compare them and have a laugh at how close to accurate we were. So if you're a Chaos Space Marine player, there's actually a ton of really cool content in the pipeline that I think is going to be a ton of fun, and also hopefully illuminating and insightful. So yeah, that's really cool. I've got another comment here from Yes My Lord. I have 4 boxes of Havoc. 1 is chain cannons, 1 las, and 1 autocannons. What should I make the last squad, and what loadout should I give each squad leader? This is a good question. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull up the thing, because I'm not super across the Chaos Space Marines, the loadout options for Havocs, because it's something that I played with it a little bit at the very start of the edition, but not recently, so I don't want to give you advice that's not relevant. So let's pull this up, and again, this is the sort of stuff, if you put a super chatted comment in there, I'll go to this length, I'll pull out the data sheets and we can talk about it. So their war gear options. So the champion can have his chainsword replaced with an accursed weapon or a power fist, and his flamer can be replaced with a bolt gun, melter, plasma pistol, plasma weapon, accursed weapon, or a power fist. So you could give him an accursed weapon and a power fist to give him a diverse range of melee options. or you could give him... I think the Power Fist is probably better than the Accursed Weapon, depending on your meta, but I like Power Fists, so I would probably give him a Power Fist and probably a Plasma Gun or a Melter Gun would be the direction I would go. The advantage of the Plasma Pistol is you can shoot it in combat, which sounds kind of irrelevant, but what that allows you to do is do actions whilst in combat, because you're eligible to shoot. That being said, your Havocs are very unlikely to be on a midfield objective trying to do actions, so I would give him the ranged weapons, and for that I think the Plasma Gun is probably better than the Melter Gun because it has longer range. So let's lock in Plasma Gun in one hand, and then either an Accursed Weapon or a Power Fist, probably a Power Fist in the other. So that's your champion. And then you've got, any number can have las cannon, auto cannon, heavy bolter, missile launcher, or chain cannon. Again, I think this falls down to what your purpose for the unit is. I actually just really like the 4 las cannons, because when you've got the sustained 5-ups, that's really, really good, because you're getting extra las cannon hits, and it also has the longest range of those weapons, so it allows you to just fire all the way down range and actually blap things. So Havoc's really good for las cannons. Or you take the chain cannons, and then instead of taking sustained hits, you take lethal hits, and now you've got a boatload of bullets, all of them with lethal hits. The problem with the chain cannons, if I'm not mistaken, is that they're AP 0. Let me just double check that. Yeah, the Reaper chain cannon, it's AP 0, so it is 8 shots, but it's with AP 0, even against things like guardsmen, like if you go into Kassakin and it's like, cool, they get a 4-up save, it's actually, you'd almost rather shoot las cannons into them and just give them no save, right? So, yeah, I reckon the best loadout for your Havocs is 4 las cannons, Plasma Gun, and Power Fist on the Sergeant, and you can just blap things with your sustained hits. So that's my thoughts on the Havocs. And what we might do in an upcoming video, because I'm just starting to get better with this streaming technology, is I can actually stream what I can see on my phone to be up on the screen there, and we can write a list together live. So if anybody's interested in that sort of thing, what I might do is I might make that a Patreon exclusive. I might hit up my Patreons and be like, cool, who's interested in writing a list live on camera? And we'll pull that up and we can do that. Or I might get, maybe I'll get some like Jeremy or one of the Team Australia guys to come over, and we'll film that live and we'll write it and we'll get it so it's more visual and more interesting. So yeah, that's really cool. Let's talk about the points cost updates though for the Chaos Space Marines. And like I said at the start of the video, if you're a player of another faction that's not Chaos Space Marines or World Eaters and you would like your points cost discussed, feel free, chuck a comment in there, and if we have time, I'll get to them. And if you want us to make sure that we get to them, make it a super chat and I will not miss it. So Chaos Bikers, they've gone down. They're interesting. They've got, one of the things that I like about the Chaos Bikers is they actually have quite a large base, right? They've got that nice big oval base, which means you can string 3 of them together and you can actually create quite a wall that's going to block your opponent's movement or prevent your opponent from being able to get onto an objective. So they're interesting in that regard. And the fact that they can uppy downy if they're within 6 inches of a table edge is really good as well. And for 75 points, they're fast, they're cheap. I think they're okay. I think they're a solid B tier unit. I don't think they're particularly exciting, but there's nothing wrong with taking them. I don't think you would ever take a unit of 6. I couldn't imagine that being a thing. But I can see a unit of 3 being a relatively cheap throwaway unit, similar in essence to the Chaos Spawn, where they're cheap, they're tough, they're fast. If they just trade off the melee damage of the spawn for a little bit of shooting damage and the utility of being able to uppy downy. That's actually kind of interesting. And the fact that they can go up in later turns means that in turns 4 and 5, when normally you're not able to deep strike, if you put something as traditional deep strike, you can do that with the bikes. So you could go turn 3, I'm going to pick up my bikes, and then turn 4, I'm going to drop them in your backfield when I get behind enemy lines. That's really effective. So I do like the Chaos Bikes, and I definitely think there's a world where they are a relevant part of the meta. Now we've got the Chaos Terminator squad. Now, This Terminator squad is very different than the World Eaters one. So we went on about World Eaters Terminators for a little bit there. World Eaters have the advance and charge. World Eaters can get the +2 move. World Eaters also have a stratagem for -1 damage, which actually makes them ridiculously tough in certain matchups. I had a game last night where Helbrecht and a unit of 10 Sword Brethren charged my World Eaters Terminators, and I'm like, yep, cool, I got the 6 up, feel no pain, and I'm going to put -1 damage on, and now he only killed like 4 or 5 of them. And then my 5 that remained were getting that +1 to hit, and they actually did heavy damage. The Chaos Space Marine Terminators can't do that. They are not as tough. They don't hit as hard. Or, I mean, they do hit as hard with the various marks, but they're not as tough, and they're not as fast. However, what they do is they can be a really good mechanism for Abaddon to get into combat. Tons of ablative wounds, high quality ablative wounds for Abaddon. And also, when they got reroll all their hits with their Dark Pacts and they're getting critical 5s on their either lethals or sustains, really, really good. And the fact that when you put Abaddon with them, they get all 4 marks, which means they get the sustained hits on shooting and then they can get the lethal hits in combat. That's really spicy as well. Or you might go, cool, this turn I want sustained hits in shooting and I'm going to blap all your small things. And then next turn I want the lethal hits in shooting. Because you have all 4 marks, you can just pick. And you get the critical 5s for all of it. So that's really, really good on those Terminators. And they also have access to all of the stratagems. We, Jeremy Martino from Team Australia, we did a deep dive on Chaos Terminators, and we were basically advocating for them with the previous points costs, saying that they were a really effective unit, and they just got cheaper. So they're obviously very, very valuable. So I think there's this Chaos Space Marine build that I would be looking at would have 3 Vindicators, it would have Abaddon and Terminators, and then the rest of the points would be spent on small things like Raptors and Warp Talons and that sort of stuff. We got the Chaos Vindicator. Like we said at the start of this, we were talking about the different ways that you can build around the Vindicator, the strengths and weaknesses of that. I think for 175 points, they're really, really good. They can be a bit swingy because it's D6 shots with D6 damage. My general rule of thumb is that I don't like taking something that has 2 points of random, right? I don't mind taking something that has D6 shots, because if you roll a 1 for the number of shots, you can just CP re-roll it if you want, and that 1 CP is going to potentially triple or more the damage output that you get that turn. Really valuable. But if you're D6 shots with D6 damage, it's like there's so many opportunities for you to spike low that it becomes an unreliable unit. So that's typically my thoughts on things that are got those 2 points of variability, and the Vindicator does fall into that category. However, for the Vindicator, I think it's worth it because it's on a very durable chassis, so you're likely to get multiple volleys of that. I don't think it's that big of a deal. And generally, when you do have those 2 points of variability, you would hope that you'd balance out. So you might only get 1 shot, but then you roll 6 for the damage, right? Or you might get 6 shots and only roll 1 for the damage, right? Either way, you'd hope that it would balance out. And yeah, the D6 damage is also really interesting, because if you do hit something and they've got 4 wounds left and you roll a 3, you probably CP re-roll it because you got a 4 up of killing the target. So it's not the end of the world. And the fact that it gets the sustained hits on that big siege cannon is absolutely bananas. So your Vindicators are always going to be Nurgle, always. Your Terminators, I run them as Nurgle. Well, actually, no, these days, because of the change, I would run them as Undivided, so you still have access to the reroll wounds strat, and they have reroll hits built in, so that makes them really effective. But whilst Abaddon's attached, they're all marks, so they get access to everything. But that just means that if your opponent's able to precision out Abaddon or something like that, and now you're running around just Terminators, you still have access to that reroll wounds. Then you've got Chosen, no changes. We've got the Cultist mobs, so they've gone down. Cultists were already a staple. I think you wanted a 2 units, being able to sticky your objectives. And also, one of the good things about Cultists is you can charge your opponent and put 1 Cultist in base contact with every one of their models. And that means that when they fight, they can't pile in with anyone. So that means your second unit, you can hit it from the side. And now, if they interrupt the combat, like say you fight somewhere over there first, if they interrupt, only 1 guy is going to be able to hit whatever units come from the side. So your Cultist mob is literally a mob tactics, where you just mob on them, you jump on top of them, you pin them down, and stop them from being able to effectively retaliate. So I really like the Cultists. That goes equally for people who have fights first, people who have fights on death. Like if there's a big unit of death company or something like that, and you know that they're going to spend the CP to fight on death, you go, cool, I'm going to charge all my cultists in so that you tag, you can't move, and I'm going to hit from the side, and now when I fight and wipe you out and you fight on death, most of that stuff has to hit cultists, and they're not killing your Terminators, they're not killing your Chosen, they're not killing your Possessed, they're not killing your Warp Talons. So I really like that. Cypher went down. I don't think that's particularly relevant, to be honest. I don't think he was worth it before, and I don't think this points cost reduction is enough to justify taking him. He's really good for the Vect that he has, where he can increase the cost of your opponent's CP, but that's kind of all he does, right? He's not really great. He doesn't provide much else. He's got the Lone Op, so he's a model, but he's one model with low OC. People can just move on to what objective he's on and just take it from him. Not too exciting there. We've got the Dark Commune, etc. They're all fine. That's, is the same as they were previously. What do we got here? Havocs and Hellbrutes. So the Havocs going down, I think, is really interesting because 5 Havocs, 4 of them with las cannons with the sustained hits. They're now cheaper than a Predator. They put out, comparable damage to a Predator from range. But the important thing is they can do it from upper levels of ruins. They can do it from essentially behind a wall, because you can deploy them behind the wall. You can't get shot, and then you can just move through the wall and shoot. Whereas if you're a Predator behind a wall, you have to go all the way around. So being able to do that is going to make it easier for you to position them where they can do their damage and not die in return. You can also do interesting things where you put, like, say you've got a level 1 ruin, you put the champion on the ground, so he's out of line of sight, and then you put 4 guys up on the top with the las cannons. Those 4 guys can rain las cannons all games. And if your opponent kills 4 guys, you take those 4 guys, they can't now target the 5th if they have a second unit activation. So that means that you are able to keep this unit alive whilst having it in a position where it can deal damage. Now that's obviously not always going to work, because sometimes they're just going to hit and kill all 5 of them in one volley. But if they do only kill 4, and you're like, yes, sick, I'm going to remove those 4, and now I've got 1 guy down here on an objective out of line of sight, your opponent's going to be real mad, and that can flip games, because all of a sudden you're getting that 5 primary that you wouldn't have otherwise got. That's very cool. So I actually really like the Havocs. I think there's a world where you take 3 Vindicators, 3 units of Havocs, and then Abaddon with Terminators. The problem with that is you're really opening yourself up to having not much in the way of forward presence. You're actually expecting Abaddon and his Terminators to do so much work. So, proceed with caution, and I think we're going to have to test this out to find the sweet spot between forward pressure and anvil units. Maybe it's only 2 units of Havocs, maybe it's only 1 unit of Havocs, who knows. Hellbrute went down. Hellbrute's interesting because it gives you both the lethals and the sustained. It's really interesting when paired with the Chaos Space Marine Terminators, because they get, if they have Abaddon attached, they get critical 5s on both. So now those bolters are just actually fucking wrecking shit. Problem is it's relatively slow, so he's not going to be wanting to move it up. He's not going to be able to keep up with the Terminators, because even though those Terminators are equally slow, but they're probably going to rapid ingress, or they're going to be advancing and charging using the Slanesh strat, and they're going to be running in. So, yeah, Hellbrute is probably a little bit too slow, and one of the other problems with the Hellbrute is he creates like a nexus where it's like you've got the Hellbrute here, and now everything else has to be within 6 inches of the Hellbrute to get his buffs, which means your whole army, instead of being able to take up this much space on the board, takes up this much space on the board, because you're all tethered to this Hellbrute. And as a result, you're not on multiple objectives, you're not spread out, your opponent's able to surround you, your opponent's able to outflank you, your opponent's able to, if it's World Eaters, for example, they're able to just send Angron in and just break multiple things at once, and it's bad times. So I think the Hellbrute for Chaos Space Marines, because it's an aura, and because he himself is relatively slow, that makes him not particularly interesting. That being said, there is some lists out there that are doing great work with it, so by all means, don't take my word as gospel. But I'm not particularly fond of the Chaos Space Marines Hellbrute. Interestingly, their Demon Princes went down. I would have loved to have seen this treatment to the World Eaters Demon Princes. That would have made them much more interesting. And I think for Chaos Space Marines, the 165 points for a foot-slogging Demon Prince isn't trash. And the The Demon Prince with Wings, again, 180 points. It's not trash, but it's also not something to, go crazy over. So I don't know if I would look into those too hard. If you're already taking one, then you're happy. You've got some extra points to play with. But this doesn't really make me think, holy crap, we need to start running Demon Princes. Yeah, I don't think they're too exciting. The Legionaries went down. This is fantastic. So when Chosen went up, I was like, that's fine, because Legionaries are awesome. A unit of 10 Legionaries with Lucius the Eternal in it is awesome. That's an awesome unit, right? Because they get the reroll wounds against targets on objectives, so you don't actually require any stratagem support. If they're near Abaddon, they're getting reroll hits as well, so they're actually just going in with a boatload of reroll hits and wounds with lethal hits or sustained hits. It's just a fuck ton of damage. So I really like the Legionnaires, and having them go down is really cool. I think that's fantastic, and I think a couple of units of Legionaries in Rhinos, maybe you do similar to what I was suggesting with the World Eaters, where you go cool, maybe you've got 2 units and a single Rhino, and you put one unit starts inside the Rhino, it can launch out onto an objective turn 1 or 2, and when it does that, the second unit loads into the Rhino, and then the Rhino moves to a next staging position, and then turns 3 or 4, that unit can jump out. Quite effective. They're high OC, they do decent damage in combat, and they're a good place for you to put some really interesting characters. So I really like the Legionaries. Legionaries with a Master of Possessions is cool. Legionaries with a Master of Executions is cool. And Legionaries with Lucius the Eternal, very cool. You can also put Fabius Bile is really good in them, because he gives them a couple of extra bodies, so he's got that. He can blank out damage. He can buff up their stats. Yeah, I like the Legionaries. There's tons of really cool stuff, and I essentially would just run them the same way that we used to run our Chosen, but they're now dirt cheap. They don't hit quite as hard and they're not quite as tough, but they're dirt cheap. And I think one of the other directions that the Chaos Space Marine players could go, instead of going down the Vindicator Terminator route, which is your really chunky, hard to kill playstyle, that's your real defensive list. If you wanted to go into more of an aggressive list, or more of a technical list, you would go cool. Lots of units of Legionaries in Rhinos, lots of units of Havocs, lots of units of Raptors, lots of these cheap kind of units, and just flood the board with cheap units. And now those Havocs pop out, they blast something, they're only on 120 points for 5 models. That's cheap. If they kill something and then die in return, you're happy with that. You don't really care. If you make your Havoc's Mark of Nurgle as well, they're going to be firing las cannons from long range, so when your opponent goes to retaliate, you can just Nurgle strat and they can't even shoot your Havocs. Really, really cool. I actually think the Chaos Space Marines with these points costs are going to be... you're going to see them in the tournaments again. I think they're back. I think this brings them back. It's just a very different list than what we saw before. You're no longer seeing the bigger Curse Cultists. You're not seeing tons of Chosen. You're seeing very different Chaos Space Marine lists emerge from this. But they're serious lists that you'll have to take into consideration. So that was my thoughts on the Legionaries. Then we got the Mauler Fiend. He went down. I actually can't remember, and I'm going to look it up now. I can't remember what the Mauler Fiend's ability was in Chaos Space Marines. So let's look it up together, shall we? How do you spell Mauler Fiend? M. Where the fuck's M in the alphabet? Here we go. So he's got the same weapons as the... reroll advance and charge rolls and ignore modifiers to move advance and charge rolls made for it. That's pretty cool. The ignoring modifiers isn't particularly relevant because a lot of the things that modify your characteristics are only affect infantry. It's really good into the Thousand Suns matchup because that Mauler Fiend is now just, it's going to get advance and charge if you make it Slanesh, which I would recommend making it Slanesh because its melee weapons are already high strength, so you don't need the Khorne because you don't need the lethal hits. You just want sustained hits. That means you can advance and charge for a CP, so it's fast and it's re-rolling its advance and charge rolls. So you're getting high advances, you're getting high charges. So this thing is fast not as fast as the World Eaters one, but it's kind of fast. And the fact that Thousand Suns won't be able to just halve its damage, half its movement, means that it's actually quite scary. And yeah, I actually think that a Mauler Fiend is a really good addition to a Chaos Space Marines list, and it's only 140 points, so I think that's actually really cheap. That's really good. Then we got the Possessed down to 130 points. When 10th edition first dropped, I was looking into Possessed because I was like, well, hang on, if you go reroll hits, reroll wounds from a strat, and you have sustained hits, and then getting your dev wounds with reroll wounds, that's really scary. The problem is now that you're not getting the reroll hits as easily, so you're not getting all your sustains. You are still getting the reroll wounds if you take them undivided, but if you take them undivided, you're then not getting advance and charge as easily. So they're in a tricky spot. But for 130 points for 5 models, they're an interesting trading piece. They're sort of similar to a regular unit of 8 bound, but they're not quite as good. So I would be leaning away from Possessed even with these points drops. And then the Raptors, I think that's the Raptors and the Venom Crawler. So the Raptors going down to 85 points, that's interesting. I really liked Raptors before, and I think they're just bringing all of the sort of infantry-based models have come down, like your Havocs, your Legionaries, your Raptors, your Possessed, all of that sort of stuff's coming down across the board. So, yeah, I like Raptors, and I would be taking multiple units. They're really good for things like behind enemy lines, for deploying teleport homers. They're really good in being able to jump out and deny objectives. I like a couple of units of Raptors. They're cheap, they're fast, they do good work. Like, think about it, they're 5 points more than Legionaries, and they can fucking fly. And they bring similar guns, similar combat. So you're trading a bit of objective control for the ability to fly, and you're trading the the ability to reroll your wounds for whatever the Raptor's ability is, which, forgive me, it's been a while since I've actually looked into CSM in too much detail. So let's have a look. Raptors is R down here. Raptors, what's their ability? Oh, battle shock tests. Who cares? That's not particularly relevant. They've got the one at the start of the fight phase. They inflict battle shock tests. That's the worst time to inflict battle shock tests on people. It is at the start of the fight phase, so it does work in your opponent's turn. So if your opponent charges into the Raptors, they're going to have to battle shock test first. And if they fail that battle shock in their turn, right, when they charge you, even if they kill you, they've failed their battle shock, so they don't hold that objective. So it stops them from getting things like Storm Hostile. If you've stickied that objective with Cultists, it stops them from taking it off you. There's a few things that can work there, but I just find that battle shock tests are just too unreliable. Expecting somebody to fail their battle shock is a losing strategy, in my opinion. And then the last thing that went down was the Venom Crawler. Now, this is something that historically I've completely overlooked because I was just like, on first inspection, I was like, these are rubbish. But 110 points for a unit, whatever the unit is pretty good. That's pretty cheap. So let's have a look together at what the Venom Crawler does. So his ability is, after you destroy an enemy unit until the end of the battle, you get +1 attacks. So that's a rubbish ability, because what's likely to happen is you're going to go in, you're going to kill something, and then you're going to die. So now that +1 attack doesn't kick in. And even if it does kick in, let's see whether it's really worth caring about. So his melee weapon, so he's got 6 attacks already, hitting on 3s, strength 6, AP 1, 2 damage. That's rubbish, because AP 1 means that if your opponent has Armor of Contempt, you're not killing even basic Marines. And even with 6 attacks, like, this guy doesn't kill a tactical squad, a 5-man tactical squad. And for 110 points, I want it to be possible. I want it to be, whereas like a unit of 10 Jackals for 65 points can kill, 5 tactical Marines, right? It's not likely, but it can do it. It's probably equally likely as the Venom Crawler. And the Venom Crawler's it's twice the points. So, yeah, I don't rate the Venom Crawler. It does have the shooting as well. Look, it's not unplayably bad. It's an okay, just annoying piece, but I don't see it doing meaningful damage, and it's also not tough to the point where it requires a meaningful response. It's only toughness 9 with 3-up save. Yeah, I think you could probably run a list that had a couple in it as just an annoying piece that blocks moves, that goes in and harasses things. But I think in order for them to do meaningful damage, you'd require multiple of them hitting at once, or you'd need to pair them with something else. And that, to me, makes them less interesting. They do have a 12-inch move, which is kind of nice. It allows them to move up onto an objective or something like that. And OC3 is actually quite good, because OC3 will out-OC a Rhino. will out OC most characters. You know, even things like 8-bound, if they charge a unit of 8-bound and kill one of them, and then the 2 8-bound fail to kill it in return, which, I mean, they're probably not going to, but if they do fail to kill it in return, well, now you've taken that objective from them. Yeah, look, I don't hate it. Look at Vashtor, the poor bloke, didn't get any love on the... let's talk about missed opportunities. So Vashtor got no love, that's disappointing. We had, where's the Disco Lord? Lord Discordant, no love. Yeah. Yeah, I think out of that, with all of those things considered, there's 2 directions that I see the Chaos Space Marines heading. One of them is triple Vindicator, Abaddon, Terminators, that sort of build, where you're like, this army is fucking tough. It's all 2-up saves across the board, and if you put it all in cover the whole time, your opponent's really going to struggle to do damage. This is what I'm talking about with the AP1 on the Venom Crawlers. It's just dumb. Like, if people have 2-up saves in cover, you're just doing nothing to them. So, yeah, that build with the Terminators and the Vindicators is really, really good. And then the other build will be like multiple units of Havocs, multiple units of Legionaries, multiple units of Raptors, multiple units of Warp Talons, and just tons and tons of trading pieces where you can just go, cool, I'm going to put a small unit out onto that objective. Your opponent has to commit something big, then you put out your big thing. So you have your Havocs hidden out of line of sight, you put out your Raptors, they bring a tank around to shoot the Raptors, you bring your Havocs up and you shoot the tank, right? You can do that sort of sequencing of trades, and because you have tons of units, you can sequence those trades quite well. So that's my thoughts on the Chaos... Sorry, the hiccups. That's my thoughts on the Chaos Space Marines. Yeah, I think this is enough to bring them back into the game, into tournaments, in a really interesting way. So we're going to take another real quick break, and then I'm going to go through the comments on this video, and we're going to answer a bunch of your questions. So in this break, if you have any questions you'd like answered, chuck them in there. If you want to make sure that they get answered first, chuck a $1 super chat on there, or a super thanks, or whatever they call it on YouTube, and I'll make sure to read those first, and then the other ones I'll scroll through, I'll give them a read, and I'll pick out the more interesting ones. So with that being said, I'm going to chuck on another quick ad break. Let's talk about the raffle this time. G'day guys, I just wanted to take a second to talk to you about the exciting Blog for the Blood God fundraiser raffle, where you can buy tickets for your chance to win a set of neoprene objective markers and a pack of 50 Blog for the Blood God dice. If you'd like to buy some tickets, click on the link in the description of this video. You can scroll down and view the prizes there, and if you'd like to buy some tickets, select buy tickets, select how many tickets you would like to buy, select that you are over 18 and that you agree with the terms, and then I would recommend deselecting the subscription because who needs unnecessary emails, and then you can proceed to fill out your details. If you are an Australian resident, you will be required to select your state. If not, just select any state. It doesn't particularly matter as long as the street address and details of postage are correct as per above. And then you can go through, proceed on payment, and then it will submit your ticket sales. The reason we've decided to do a raffle in order to raise funds is because this year I have been named as captain for Team Australia for the WTC World Team Championships of Warhammer 40k. This is a once-in-a-lifetime, really exciting opportunity for me. However, as an Australian, that trip is extremely expensive, and unfortunately, life does what it does and has thrown a bunch of unforeseen expenses my way in the terms of veterinary bills for my very sick cat. So any help that we can get to send me to Europe to represent Australia would be greatly appreciated. And also, if there's any money left over at the end, it will go towards improving the quality and frequency of the content here on YouTube. So I very much appreciate any support that you are prepared to give, and I look forward to rewarding that with some exciting prizes. If this does well, we'll do multiple of these raffles because I've got plenty of stuff to give away, and I really do want to show some support for the community that supports me so well. So thank you very much for your consideration. If you'd like to buy a ticket, links are in the description below, and let's get into today's video. Alrighty guys, we are back in 2 hours and 15 minutes into the stream. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I've really enjoyed talking to you guys, and basically what we're going to do for the rest of this video is we're just going to go through comments. I'm going to start with the super chats, the paid comments, give them the first say, and I'm going to give them a decent time, and then I'm just basically going to go read all of the comments and rapid fire some responses. So we've got here a comment from Untested Gaming, $5 donation. Thank you very much. Howdy from the USA. Do you see any use for land raiders in the Chaos Space Marines? Yes, definitely. Depending on your terrain layout. If you're playing player placed, they're fantastic, and if you're playing GW, they're passable as well. The Chaos Space Marine Land Raiders are probably one of the best Land Raiders in the game because they can get sustained 5+ on those las cannons. They're really, really good, and they can protect high damage squishy units. So a unit of Legionnaires is very easy for your opponent to kill if you're on an objective, right? So if you have the 10 Legionaries inside of a Land Raider, now they're very hard to kill, and then they can launch out of that Land Raider and do pretty heavy damage. You take Slanesh Legionaries so that they can disembark, and then they can, advance and charge to get onto a midfield objective somewhere. They'll destroy most things, most small things, with all their reroll hits and wounds and all that sort of stuff, depending on where Abaddon is, etc. So that's really effective. And then the shooting from that Land Raider, if it's near Abaddon and it's got, the 4 las cannon shots with reroll hits and sustained hits 5+, you're probably going to get 5 or 6 hits out of your 4 shots, right? And now you're going, okay, cool, I got a bunch of hits. You're actually killing things. You're killing serious things with just las cannons from a fucking Land Raider. Really, really good. So the fact that they get the sustained hit 5+, plus the capacity to get reroll hits, just almost doubles their damage output. So most people look at a Land Raider and they're like, oh, it's just a big tough thing that does a little bit of shooting damage. It's like, no, the Chaos Space Marines Land Raiders actually do fucking shitloads of damage, right? They're terrifying. And, they have the capacity to house something that's really squishy and therefore needs a tough bunker to launch out of and does really high damage when it comes out. So I really like the Land Raiders in Chaos Space Marine lists. I think the critical point here, though, is that they are vulnerable to terrain. Certain terrain layouts just make the Land Raider really, really tricky to use. If you're playing on WTC, I think it's just a forget about it situation. But if you're playing on something that's a little bit more open, and has a little bit more, open maneuverability, then a Land Raider is fantastic. So, yeah, I quite like it. I think it's really good with, Legionaries inside. It was previously good with Chosen inside. I actually think that there is still a world where we take Chosen. I don't think they're, out of the game entirely, but I think they're, especially with these points cost updates, I think they're outshone by Legionaries, who do a very similar thing for like half the cost. Like how much you Chosen these days for, let's find them in here. So 130 points for Chosen, whereas it's only 80 for Legionaries, so 160 points. So for an extra 30 points, you get twice as many guys. So, and you get better OC. I think the Legionaries are fine. So that's sort of my take on the Land Raider. It's a shame that Chaos don't have Land Raider options. Like if you could take one with flamers on the sides, now we'd be cooking, because then you'd take the lethals. Actually, no, it wouldn't matter. Sustained or lethals, if you're auto-hitting, it wouldn't matter. So maybe we don't. Maybe we want one that's like a Hurricane Bolters or something, where it's just a ton of shots. Or something where it's some kind of, a cursed weapon style, Land Raider. That would be really cool. But yeah, I think based on this, competitively, Land Raider is totally viable. Now I'm going to scroll to the top, and I'm just going to read through some comments, and I'm going to rapid fire answer them. And then once I get to the end, I will do another quick scour to see if there's been any super chat comments. So if you want your comment read and you haven't commented yet, chuck a super chat in there and I'll make sure I get to it. So we've got talking about the world needs Molofine. So I think that was one of the first things I talked about in the stream. So if you missed that, just go back and watch the stream from the start, and you'll catch the world needs Molofine stuff. That was some really cool stuff in there. Happy Boy with his Terminators, Miguel Perez. Yep. Terminators are sick now. I just realised I've left this fucking paint pot open for the entire time whilst I'm chatting to you guys, and I haven't painted any of these Terminators. I've just done their bases, which the whole point of this stream was to keep me mentally, entertained whilst I painted these Terminators. And I kind of shit the bed on that one. And I've probably just dried out all of my gold paint, so trip to the hobby store. CSM all the way. I don't think the points drops are enough for World Eaters. I disagree. I think these points drops are fantastic for World Eaters, but I think they're also fantastic for CSM, so, either way is fine. Legionaries, Harrison Sainer. Legionaries are quite nice for 80 points. I completely agree. Miguel again. Is it okay if I use Cataphracti Terminators as World Eaters Terminators? Absolutely. As long as you've got the right weapon options, whether you have your combi weapons and your power fists and stuff, then absolutely. In fact, I prefer the Cataphracti for World Eaters Terminators because the Red Butchers, the World Eaters in the lore, were notorious for their Cataphracti armor. So, yeah, I think that's great. I think that's perfectly fine. We've got Benjamin Lynch saying, howdy. People seem to think that the Mauler for World Eaters is great on GW terrain and less so otherwise. Yeah, I completely agree. So one of the things you'll notice with the GW terrain packs is there's about the same amount of terrain. There's the same amount of board space that is terrain. And by that I mean like the Perspex bases for the terrain covers about the same amount of the board. However, the actual terrain pieces themselves are quite a bit smaller. And as a result, there's Mauler Fiends can run over the terrain. Whereas in WTC, there's still the same amount of Perspex base, but they're all walls, right? And as a result, the Mauler Fiend has to go around, whereas in GW, you can go through. So GW trains, things like Mauler Fiends, Land Raiders, Lord of Skulls, any Demon Princes, like monsters, they're all way more attractive on the GW layouts than they are on the WTC layouts. And then player-placed layouts, I view them almost in the same way as the GW ones because you can create those openings and make sure that you can get through. So if you're playing player-placed, you can go, cool, I'm going to park my Lord of Skulls here. I'm going to place one piece there, meaning the Lord of Skulls can run straight through onto that center objective. If you can get a Lord of Skulls on the center objective, it's just pure money from there on out. So, yeah, I agree with that general statement. Hopefully you'll get surgeons soon. I wish the guard infantry could do stuff. That's from Kayan Klupaks. Yeah, I would love to see some new units for the World Eaters. There's plenty of things that I'd like to see. One of them is definitely a surgeon. Something that can attach to Terminators would also be really good because that's one of the drawbacks of them. It's an interesting drawback though on the Terminators because the fact that you can't attach a character to them means that you don't fall prey to the temptation to add a character to them. So that means that not only are my Terminators cheaper than most people's, like we're only 380 points, whereas Thousand Suns are like 400 points, CSM with 385, I think it was, so we're cheaper, but they're also likely to add a 120 point to 150 point character to that unit. So now they're talking about like a 550 point unit versus my 380 point unit. And both of those are going to require a similar response to kill. So the World Eater Terminators are actually comparatively quite cheap because you can't add a character. Whereas if there was a Terminator character that was 120 points or 130 points that you could add to the Terminators and like that gave them access to a free stratagem and an extra guy that can do damage, you'd be really tempted to put them in there. But now you're talking about a 500 point, 550 point unit, and now it's really, really expensive. Whereas these actually work out to be quite cheap for how many bodies you get. So as much as I really do want there to be the option to have a character to add to the Terminators, I actually don't think it's that critical. Interesting take there, because most people, one of the main things that they disregard the Terminators for is because you can't attach a character, so therefore they don't worry about it. It's like, well, maybe you don't want to. Maybe you don't want to. What else have we got here? I'd pay 150 to 160 for a Helldrake with 20-inch Bale Flamer. It's decent enough at that point, but GW hates flyers, and that's from Zinf25. I completely agree. GW do seem to have a hatred for flyers, and I think that's probably just because there's been a lot of community outrage because flyers are notoriously hard to balance. If you make it so that you can't hit them, then all of a sudden they're OP, but if you make it so that you can hit them, they're kind of rubbish. It's kind of hard for them to balance them. I think what they should be doing with flyers is just treating it like, what would you do if you had a Mauler Fiend that had the flyer keyword? Like, how many points would that be? It wouldn't be 210. But yeah, I think you're right. 150 is probably fine. I would probably take one at 150, but not 210. Then we've got Bigger in Texas, joining a combat patrol thing with some new friends. Why does GW give such silly loadouts to the Berserkers? Yeah, it's kind of frustrating that the Berserker kit... The only thing that I would like to see in the Berserker kit is the champion be able to take an upgraded weapon. The fact that like your Chaos Space Marine Legionaries can take 2 heavy chain axes and then a power fist on the sergeant means that unit has 3 heavy weapons, whereas the World Eaters only get 2. That's annoying. I would like to see more heavy weapons in the Berserkers. I'm also disappointed in GW. I feel like the release of the Berserker kit was a missed opportunity for them to make a dual kit that had rampages. So rampages in the Horus Heresy stuff were like your more elite Berserker type guys. And imagine if the unit came out and it's like, cool, you could give all of them either Bolt Pistol and Berserker Chain Blade, or you could give every one of them a 2-handed chain weapon, and you have a bunch of them with 2-handed chain axes, a bunch of them with like meteor hammers, which was something they used in Heresy, which was like a chain and ball and chain kind of weapon. You know, a bunch of them with various different melee weapon loadouts, and they're all just like a heavy melee weapon. And that way you can run the unit as a more expensive unit called Rampages, which have more heavy weapons, or you can run them as the cheaper unit, which is Berserkers, which have the less weapons but they're cheaper, right? That would have been really cool. Could have created a lot more diversity in the lineup for World Eaters, the units available, without having to really generate any additional kits. So that's a missed opportunity in my opinion. That being said, GW seem to be going away from the dual kit model and moving more towards you've got a kit for your Chosen, you've got a kit for your Legionaries. They're different kits. Whereas you used to just call those Legionaries that you've made with the weapons, you'd call them your Chosen. Now it's very clearly separate. What do we got here? From Chaz, good evening. I've just started collecting some CSM this week and your videos have been great, thanks. Will you be talking about the CSM points as well? So yes, Chaz, we've covered those CSM points, so make sure if you missed that, jump back and check it out. But thanks for tuning in, and thank you for the comments. I'm really glad that you've been enjoying my videos. It's really inspiring to hear that feedback, because sometimes it gets a little bit hard to stay motivated to keep these videos coming, so the feedback is greatly appreciated. From Abracadabra, I remember you from my last stream. I can never figure out how to pronounce what your username is. ACRPPRCA. I'm going to call you Abracadabra. So 10 points, what to do with, I'll upgrade some guns to melters or something. Oh, wait. Yeah, I still completely agree that GW making all war gear free is bad for the game. Not only is it bad for balancing the game, because it means that there's certain units that just always take those weapons and get massive value out of them, but it also just makes writing lists really hard. You know, if you could take, if I could take the Berserkers and not pay for those plasma pistols, absolutely I would. You know, if I could take, the Rhino and not pay for the Havoc Launcher and not pay for the, extra Combi Bolter and those sorts of things, absolutely I would. So being able to slim down units, and then when you get to the end of your list, deciding, okay, cool, I've got an extra 20 points to spend, I'm going to throw plasma pistols on all my Berserkers. The counter argument to that is then, depending on your list, you have models with plasma pistols or without, which makes modeling them quite hard, because are you going to glue the plasma pistol on or not, right? Whereas the advantage of this system is you're going to put the plasma pistols on, because you're never not going to take those plasma pistols. So, because they're free, right? So there's pros and cons to it, but I think that, all in all, it's better to have the option. It allows people to create more unique lists, allows people to personalize their lists. It also, the argument that, it's too complicated, it's like, no, 40k is an extremely complicated game. If you're able to play it at all, you're able to fucking navigate a 5-point upgrade on a unit, right? So I don't buy the whole it's too complicated argument. The main argument that I see in pro for points being, upgrades being free, is the modeling side of things, where you just model it however you want with the right weapons. You don't have to worry about, do I really want to pay for this plasma pistol every time? So I think that's the main argument in defense of this system. But if I could change it out, I would. I think that the previous system was way better. Being able to increase your squad size by 1 or 2 models here and there, I also really liked. Being able to go, cool, I'm actually just going to take 7 Legionaries. Like, why does it have to be 5 or 10? The other advantage to this system, I guess, is that it is very easy to write lists in, like, rapidly. You can just go, boop, 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 that's my list, done. You know, whereas previously, like, you'd and ah over those last 20 points. Do I want this? Do I want that? It became more challenging. But again, it's a fucking challenging game. That's part of the fun. Part of the rewarding part of 40k is that it is challenging, and overcoming those challenges is the definition of reward, right? So, yeah, I think they've missed the ticket here. They've favoured, new players to the game or less sophisticated players at the expense of their true fan base, and I think that's a mistake. I think what they should have been doing is making the game that their fans want, that their existing fans want, and then using their fans to pull in and foster new players, instead of pissing in the face of their fans in order to placate new players. Because those new players, if they don't have an existing network of players to play with, they're not going to join the game anyway. So, yeah, I think they've struck a balance, I guess, and I'm not overly critical of it. I just disagree. That's where I stand with that. Then we've got Marco Mondragon. 3 Lord of Skulls. I've won so far. I will get 2 more if you think they're worth it. See, this is why GW should be giving me a kickback. I have 3. I bought 3. And if you want to play games and you don't have any aspirations of winning tournaments, right? You just want to go to tournaments and have a ton of fun, have a really awesome time at tournaments, and you want to have some games where you win with ease and some games where you lose and it's fine, then triple Lord of Skulls, 3 units of Jackals, and Angron is probably the most fun you'll have ever. Because those Lord of Skulls are really tough, they do shooting damage and melee damage, so they're really effective units, and Angron obviously is an amazing unit as well, and that list, just on stats alone, will win a lot of matchups. You'll be able to just go, cool, they actually just can't kill my Lord of Skulls, and I have 3 of the fucking things. And if they kill Angron, who they can kill, I'm going to be able to pretty reliably resurrect him because I have 3 fucking Lord of Skulls, right? That list is so much fun, and it's quite powerful. The problem is like really hyper-tuned tournament lists will be able to slap that around. The really hyper-tuned tournament lists will make that really hard. But if you're relatively new to the game or you don't take it that seriously, they're going to make it hard anyway. So you might as well have fun with it. So, yeah, I'm a huge advocate for the triple Lord of Skulls build. It's so much fun. I actually played against it at a recent tournament where he had the triple Lord of Skulls and Angron, and I had Angron and like all this other stuff, like a couple Morphines, a bunch of 8-bound, that sort of stuff. And it was really hard, and I like what I considered a tuned World Eaters list, like it was hyper-tuned for that at the time, and he was running this meme list, and I was like, I can't fucking kill these Lords of Skulls, because if I charge him with 8-bound, he just puts neg 1 damage on him, and the 8-bound do nothing, so I can't kill them with that. The only thing in my army that can kill Lord of Skulls is Angron, and he has 3 of the fucking things. So that was a really hard matchup. I was just lucky that because of the way that the movement worked, it was very hard for him to get onto the objectives that he wanted to get onto, which meant I was able to just dominate the primary and win on victory points. But it was a really fun game, and he was laughing the whole time. It's also a real simple game, because you're just like, cool, I just move my big chunky dudes around, and I don't really care. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan of the triple Lord of Skulls list. So, GW, I want 5%. What do we got here? We got Transgirl Bacon. Interesting username. I love my female custodies. I might do an actual video breaking down my opinion on the female custodies, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are either going way too hard on the whole, it's woke, it's bad, blah, blah, blah angle. And then there's some people that are going way too hard on the everybody who hates this is an incel angle. And I think both of those groups are missing a lot of the nuance of this topic. And I think it's actually a deeply fascinating topic to talk about. So I would actually really like to have a nice, long, deep conversation about the female custodies and whether or not it is a good or a bad thing, and whether or not it is, a problem for the hobby overall, or whether it's, just people being stuck in their ways, or whether it actually is, a problem. Because I have some pretty nuanced thoughts on that. So let me know in the comments if you think that would be an interesting conversation, if you'd like to see that. And also, for the algorithm, let me know in the comments what you guys think. But I think that's a very fascinating topic, and it's also quite topical. So I might organise to get a mate over, and because I've got a few mates on either side, so maybe what I'll do is I'll get two of them over, I'll get them to debate on camera, and I'll mediate, and because I think both sides have some very interesting and valid points. So yeah, from Zinth25, the Defiler brings back psychic damage. It inflicts it on the other player while they gaze upon it. Yeah, but it also inflicts it upon you whilst you gaze upon it. And it also inflicts it upon you whilst you have to paint the fucking thing. I actually have 3 Defilers in the cases over there that I bought recently, anticipating this data slate, because I thought they were going to go down. And if they went down, I think they become actually a relevant tool in the World Eater's arsenal. But unfortunately they didn't go down, so they can stay on the shelf. Then we've got Benjamin Lynch saying, Gravis, I haven't seen a Tactical Marine All Edition. I have seen Firstborn Crusaders. Yeah, I mean, Firstborn, all CSM are Firstborn, all World Eaters are Firstborn, theoretically. But yeah, no, you're right, they're not super common. The Primaris seem to outshine them in most ways. Face United, a JD at 7:13 a.m. I like it. I actually started at 6 a.m. And it's not just a regular JD, it's a double jack. So I'm about 3 standard drinks in. I've got a really, really big day of hobby. I've got to get these Terminators finished, and then I've got a bunch of mates coming over for practice for the Australian Team Championship. So I'm going to break out the tables and have a bunch of practice games, and also got a few mates that I need to help them get their armies ready for the tournament as well. So we've got a big day of 40k, so I had to get up at 6 o'clock this morning so that I could get this stream in, get my thoughts out there on this balance update before the boys come over, and I'm going to be shit-faced by lunchtime, and then these Terminators are going to get painted very poorly, but they will be done tournament ready, and then I'll go through after the tournament and make them pretty. Yes, my lord. And they're worth it in any other cult legion. I'm not sure what that's referencing, unfortunately. Can Kliparks, I forget, can we take the World Eater Mauler Fiend in regular CSM? No, you cannot. So this has been an interesting design choice by GW, where there's like the Mauler Fiend for World Eaters has different rules than the Mauler Fiend for CSM, which has different rules for the Mauler Fiend for Thousand Suns, for example. I'm not even sure if Thousand Suns can take them. I think they can. But yeah, different rules for each Mauler Fiend, and therefore each one is locked to its particular faction. Benjamin Lynch, Tendrils. So I'm guessing that's a question on whether or not you take the Magma Cutters or the Lasher Tendrils on your Mauler Fiends. I actually think it's probably the... it depends on whether you want to front load your damage, right? So the Magma Cutters are 6-inch range melter gun, right? So you're not likely to be shooting them with that, because you're probably going to be making charges from outside of 6. So if you're front loading damage, you take the Lasher Tendrils, because then you get to hit them and get all your Power Fists and all your Lasher Tendrils. Whereas if you're worried that they're going to hit you and you're going to survive, you want melter guns to shoot into combat in the subsequent turns. Or if you think you are going to be putting it on the board and full sending it, then you're going to want the Magma Cutters so that you can shoot them before you go in, and that wounds them, so that gets you pluses to your charges and pluses to your hit rolls. But the problem is you're often going to, if you're a World Eater, you're going to be advancing and charging, which means you're not shooting your Magma Cutters, because I don't believe they're assault. I believe they're just pistols. So I think the Lasher Tendrils is probably the way to go, based purely on that you want to front load your damage. You're going to be advancing, so you're not going to be shooting your Magma Cutters anyway, and you're often going to be charging from outside of that 6 inches. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Tendrils. How would you kit out 10-man Termi squad. I did cover this at the start of the video when I was talking about the World Eaters Terminators. It depends on if they're World Eaters or CSM. CSM, you want combi bolters on everybody, autocannons, and as many power fists as you can get. You don't want the double accursed weapon. You just want a single accursed weapon and combi bolter, because weight of fire is really good for CSM. For World Eaters, I think you want the combi weapons instead of combi bolters, and you want as many power fists as you can get, 2 autocannons, and you want 2 guys with the double accursed weapon. But if you'd like a more detailed breakdown of why all of those decisions are what they are, check the start of the video. What have we got here? More questions. Nurgle Land Raider with Nurgle Havocs inside, perhaps? Yeah, that's not bad. You can actually put 2 units of Havocs inside of it, and you can move it out, and then you can disembark out and just go, cool, here's 8 las cannons from the Havocs, and then another 4 las cannons from that. If you put Abaddon in there as well, that's actually pretty fucked. It's telegraphed, right? Like, they're going to know where that's coming from, but imagine that coming in from, you rapid ingress it somewhere, and then in your, I don't know, it's probably too many points for for strategic reserves. It would be. Yeah, so forget that. You won't be able to do that. But you would come on, disembark out, and then just whoosh, billion las cannon shots into something. That's actually fucking wild. Chaz, CSM worth bringing a battle line from the other Chaos armies. So there's the Berserkers, the Rubric Marines, the Plague Marines, and the Noise Marines are the other CSM armies. And I personally don't think any of them are valuable in a Chaos Space Marine list. I think you just go with Legionaries, they're fine. Yeah, that's pretty much everything that we've got in here in terms of questions. So I'm going to wrap up the stream here. Thank you very much for tuning in, and thank you to all of those who did a donation for the get their questions answered. I really do appreciate that. It's going to go a long way towards helping me continue to build this channel and help out with the financial situation that I've got myself in this year. May or may not have overcommitted to some extent, but it is what it is. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll talk to you guys in the next one, and yeah, if you have any feedback or comments that you want to put in there about how this stream went, if you joined in after the stream was up, let me know what you think. And I'm looking to do these a little bit more frequently, so any feedback on how I can improve the quality of them would be greatly appreciated. So with that being said, I'm going to end it here. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll talk to you soon. G'day, guys. I just wanted to take a second to talk to you about the exciting Blog for the Blood God fundraiser raffle, where you can buy tickets for your chance to win a set of neoprene objective markers and a pack of 50 Blog for the Blood God dice. If you'd like to buy some tickets, click on the link in the description of this video. You can scroll down and view the prizes there, and if you'd like to buy some tickets, select buy tickets, select how many tickets you would like to buy, select that you are over 18 and that you agree with the terms, and then I would recommend deselecting the subscription, because who needs unnecessary emails, and then you can proceed to fill out your details. If you are an Australian resident, you will be required to select your state. If not, just select any state. It doesn't particularly matter, as long as the street address and details of postage are correct as per above. And then you can go through, proceed on payment, and then it will submit your ticket sales. The reason we've decided to do a raffle in order to raise funds is because this year I have been named as captain for Team Australia for the WTC World Team Championships of Warhammer 40k. This is a once-in-a-lifetime, really exciting opportunity for me. However, as an Australian, that trip is extremely expensive, and unfortunately, life does what it does and has thrown a bunch of unforeseen expenses my way in the terms of veterinary bills for my very sick cat. So any help that we can get to send me to Europe to represent Australia would be greatly appreciated. And also, if there's any money left over at the end, it will go towards improving the quality and frequency of the content here on YouTube. So I very much appreciate any support that you are prepared to give, and I look forward to rewarding that with some exciting prizes. If this does well, we'll do multiple of these raffles, because I've got plenty of stuff to give away, and I really do want to show some support for the community that supports me so well. So thank you very much for your consideration. If you'd like to buy a ticket, links are in the description below, and let's get into today's video.